The Ouroboros Cycle, Part 1. There are a lot of SCPs on the SCP Wiki, thousands of them in fact, and among the most notable of these entries are the various proposals for the 001 slot. I've already done a video discussing a number of these proposals, but in sheer size and scope, none of the proposals at this time can compete with the Ouroboros Cycle. This is the first topic I've covered on this channel that I've chosen to deliberately break up into a multi-part series, due to its size, and although the cycle comprises 4 separate parts, there very well could be more than 4 videos. The 4 parts of the cycle are connected to one another, sometimes more blatantly than other times, but they do comprise a singular story. A story involving reality benders, death, destruction, ineptitude, power struggles, gods, humans, and multiple different groups of interest and persons of interest. Viewing my previous videos will help you prepare for this mini-series, but as always, I'll attempt to explain to the best of my ability. Let's begin then with the first part, the children. The individual accessing this file is one of the O5 Council, O5-13. And we see that the children are a thaumial SCP, meaning they assist the Foundation in some way with containing other anomalies. They are contained underneath a former church in Mexico, which is designated a military waste disposal site, with drones instructed to kill anyone coming within 10 kilometers. A note by O5-2 states that a number of other false 001 items have been added to the database, to protect the secrecy of this one, and the info on this file should be drowned in memetic kill agents. Apparently, the O5 Council really wants to keep whatever the children are a pretty big secret, so let's find out exactly what they are. The children are 9 human beings aged 4 to 11 who gained anomalous properties after some sort of project occurred. They were improperly used, which we'll understand in a bit, which resulted in the death of a high-ranking staff member. Termination of the children was ordered, but they still continued to display signs of life, despite them being functionally brain-dead and buried in a tomb beneath the church. Each anomalous child constantly outputs massive amounts of gamma radiation, measured in the hundreds of gigajoules. When separated from another, this radiation is outputted randomly, which is of course horribly dangerous to anyone in the proximity without protection, but otherwise containable. When brought within proximity of each other, however, things get a bit more interesting. The children are collectively capable of somehow transmitting this radiation across vast distances, resulting in the utter termination of objects, individuals, or even entire places. For your information, researchers at the University of Leicester concluded that it would take about 3 gigajoules of energy to vaporize a human body, which would also be capable of melting 5,000 pounds of steel, to put the children's capabilities into a bit of perspective. The next document provided is the proposal for a project named Twins of God, which resulted in the children. The project was first introduced in 1922, so this goes back quite a ways. The goal of the project was pretty clear, essentially to create an anomalous weapon, wieldable only by the Foundation, that is capable of destroying any hostile anomalous threat at long range. The leader on the project was O5-1, assisted by 2 other O5 members, further indications that this was a super high priority project. They were given a few anomalous objects, a new containment and testing facility, and at least 50 adult D-Class. They learned that through the interactions between 2 of the anomalous objects, objects over long distances could be altered to make them functionally non-existent. Using another item, they can transfer this property to a human, allowing for greater control. And if successful, the resulting anomalous human will be handed over to the administrator of the Foundation. This entire project was put into motion to deal with a single group of interest, known as the Kingdom of Abaddon, which we'll get to in a minute. The administrator alone will have access to a number of mind-kill agents embedded in the anomaly to prevent others from utilizing it. There are 4 different levels of these agents, escalating in effect from reduction of motor functions to reduction of mental faculties to fully dissolving their upper nervous system. Notably, the agent designed to reduce anomalous capabilities is still undergoing development. If these kill agents fail to stop the anomaly or prevent it from falling into enemy hands, security teams are to engage and terminate utilizing long-range ballistic weapons and anti-radiation protection gear. If this fails, the Foundation brings in heavier artillery, continually bombarding the anomaly with cannon fire. If this also fails, an on-site explosive is activated, and the administrator will follow up on this, whatever that entails. 2 years into the project, it's run into some issues, as the experimentation has resulted in acute radiation sickness and a handful of casualties. Not great, but not terrible. They reinforced the containment facility and moved the personnel chambers off-site. The Kingdom of Abaddon continued to trouble the Foundation, resulting in the administrator putting in more resources into the project in an attempt to expedite the results. Unfortunately, so far, no human has been capable of surviving the process of gaining the anomalous properties. Basically, their minds would be fried, resulting in random outbursts of energy that would destroy nearby objects and people, and the team would have to terminate. Thus, the idea was born to spread out the anomalous properties across a number of different individuals, to lessen the strain on each one. It seems by this point, though, the Foundation's resources were running low in their war against the Kingdom of Abaddon, and so the supply of D-Class to the facility was running dry. A group of armed Foundation agents entered a church in a small Mexican town, and collected a number of children for testing. The rest of the population was given amnestics and moved out, while the town became the new testing site. 23 of the children were chosen for research, and the rest were terminated. We learn in a letter from the administrator that the project team was authorized to go into the town to find subjects, but only adults. He also instructed them to tread lightly, as enough blood has been shed. Well, it seems that 05-1 didn't care much for the administrator's thoughts on the matter, as they got plenty of blood on their hands, and with children no less. While it might seem as if this is a typical example of some monstrous individuals working for a shadowy organization, it could just be that the ends justify the means in this case. Let's find out about this Kingdom of Abaddon that has the Foundation so spooked. They are marked as priority level 5, presumably the highest, with a very high threat level. They are a collection of anomalous humanoids located in the Sahara Desert, each one of them a capable reality bender. This means that capture of these entities has proven to be impossible, and generally exceedingly dangerous. First discovery of the Kingdom of Abaddon was in 1912 by a convoy of French military in northern Libya, who were reportedly attacked by 6 sorcerers capable of flight and resistance to firearms. 80% of the convoy was wiped out, and the survivors were amnesticized and released. The Foundation would soon encounter the group themselves while raiding a warehouse in southern Egypt belonging to the Church of the Broken God. The MTF there were attacked by a group of anomalous individuals, but managed to fight them off and even capture a lower-ranking reality bender. Through interrogation, the Foundation learned that the Kingdom of Abaddon was a group of reality benders originally from Arabia that went into the Sahara to make their own nation. Using their abilities, they converted a section of the desert into a hospitable kingdom and began growing their civilization. Newborns were brought before their leader, known as God King Abaddon, who converted them into reality benders. Inbreeding and genetic malfunctions plague the closed society, however, and the organization will likely fall within 20 years' time. It seems the God King is aware of this fact, and so now the kingdom is branching outwards across the African continent, attacking Foundation facilities and stealing SCPs. Yeah, an army of hostile, inbred reality benders is certainly a pretty big problem, and having access to a weapon capable of obliterating them from long distances would definitely be handy. The project to create this weapon was finally completed in November of 1924, 2.5 years after its commencement and 12 years after initial sightings of the Kingdom of Abaddon. The announcement made by O5-1 claims that they have spat in the face of God and took his throne for their own. After killing hundreds or more D-Class, they managed to successfully turn a group of children into brain-dead living weapons. O5-1 calls the administrator short-sighted for expressing regret about what they did to that Mexican town and to the children, but he says that they are gods now. Thus begins the testing of these godlike children, and we learn that what seems to be happening is that the children are drawing energy from a currently unknown extra-dimensional space, and using that energy to unbind atoms at the quantum level. We got a hint of this earlier, as one of the SCPs they used to make the children was called Harkin's Gateway. The only questions then are, what exactly is it a gateway to, and what exactly is this energy doing to people? Apparently, the Foundation does not know, and does not especially care, as the children are doing what they were made to do: eliminate threats. All the children require is a description of a person, place, or object, and they immediately get to work. They tested their abilities on a steel rod, 5 kilometers away, resulting in its vaporization, with no quantifiable remains left. They tested another rod, 800 kilometers away, with the same result. O5-1 leaves a note that truly this is a weapon built for only the boldest of men. They tested a steel sphere 1,000 kilometers away with the same result, and then amped it up, pointing the children at a Church of the Broken God worship site in Turkey, 11,500 kilometers away. The site itself was vaporized, but not the individuals inside of it. They then told the children to target an individual at the same site, resulting in his vaporization. The administrator sends a letter to O5-1 expressing his gratitude on the success of the project, and how happy he is that they'll finally be able to stop the Kingdom of Abaddon. He goes on, however, to admit his concerns about O5-1 himself, worried that the stress of the project has taken its toll on him. He's planning on promoting him to Site Director of the newly constructed Site-19, and they'll discuss the details when he visits the children next month. O5-1 responds with a simple, "I am fine, Administrator. The project is finished. We will complete our task when you arrive." That sounds a little ominous, and sure enough, the next note from a month later tells us that the Administrator was murdered. O5-1 is one of the killers, with 3 other doctors and an agent listed as accomplices. The Kingdom of Abaddon was apparently wiped out as well, as all of the MTF teams assigned to investigate them are recalled from active duty. Examination of the Sahara Desert reveals not a single trace of their civilization, as the children utterly obliterated them. Let's get some explanations then, in the form of an audio recording made by O5-13, whom you might remember is the one accessing this whole document. It's been a long time since the night that the Administrator died, and he mentions that he might be the only one left who still remembers what happened. He begins discussing O5-1, who he describes as smart, charismatic, passionate, and most notably, detached. O5-1 was the original designer of the Thaumiel designation, as he had no love for the Foundation's commitment to containment, and thought that they could provide better containment of most of the anomalies if they just utilized some of them. This willingness to use anomalies rather than just keep them locked up might tip off some red flags for you if you've been following this whole series, but I'll save that for the end. As a result of this, O5-1 jumped at the chance to lead the project to create an anomalous weapon, and was given the lead due to his charisma. O5-13 admits how hilariously outmatched the Foundation was against the Kingdom of Abaddon, and although you might be thinking that the SCP Foundation doesn't have too much trouble containing reality benders, keep in mind that this was taking place in the 1920s, when the Foundation was far less capable. Additionally, there were reports that God King Abaddon was a Class 5 reality bender, meaning that he could have just wiped the entire Foundation from existence if he wanted to. As it was, however, they were more systematic, wiping out sites and taking a handful of SCPs with them. O5-13 says that O5-1 was fascinated by the project, and was fascinated by the children. He can still hear their screams in his head from when they put them into the machine and pulled out their souls, replacing them with something else. That also sounds pretty ominous, and another clue that the Foundation at the time was messing with forces far beyond their understanding. The administrator arrived at the site to witness O5-1 telling the children to destroy the Kingdom of Abaddon. There was a flash of light, and although they had no way of knowing if it worked, they breathed a sigh of relief. Then, suddenly, the administrator disappeared, with his clothes falling to the floor, and O5-1 sprinted away towards an emergency exit. He escaped, along with 4 other members of the team, and a number of junior and senior staff defected with him. Apparently, O5-1 had been planning this rebellion all along, and helped create the project just to facilitate it. They proceeded to bury the children beneath the church, who are likely still alive, and still capable of destroying anything in existence. The only one that knows the activation words, however, is O5-1, who is still missing. The 8 members of the O5 Council who remained forged ahead, but O5-13 still occasionally thinks about those buried children, and about O5-1, wondering if he found whatever it was he was looking for. The final note attached to the file is addressed to O5-13, and I'll take the time to read it in its entirety. 13. When we were young, you asked me if I thought that our dreams would ever be realized, if we would ever be able to keep the world truly safe, and hang it up for good. You asked me if I thought we had the means to do so, or if the means existed at all. You asked me to what lengths must we go, what prices we must pay, what allegiances we must forge, in order to achieve perfection. I did not know then. I do know now. There will come a day when the secrets that the Foundation has tried to hide away will rise up from the shifting sands in glorious appearance, when the subjugated will break free from the bonds of their captors, and when the march of progress will no longer be impeded by those who would huddle around their fires, swatting at the ever-growing shadows. On that day, the Foundation will be cast aside, and all that will remain is purpose. Do you hear the black moon howling, 13? You will. Soon. Vive l'insurrection. Vive l'insurrection translates to long live the insurrection. And if it's not clear by now, O5-1 and his compatriots formed the Chaos Insurgency. I suggest checking out my video on that group if you're unfamiliar. But we know that they are opposed to the Foundation and have no qualms about utilizing anomalies for their own purposes. The only problem is we don't know what those purposes are. 05-1 had the activation words to utilize the children, but whether or not he's dead now or if he passed those words on to anyone else is unknown. The children as a standalone SCP-001 proposal likely would not make many big waves, so we'll have to look at it as part of the Ouroboros cycle to get the big picture. It is an interesting story though, of humans messing with forces beyond both their control and understanding in an effort to protect humanity, which is true for the SCP Foundation as a whole as well. Not all of the questions brought up in this part will get answered throughout the Ouroboros cycle, and that's okay. But it does show us that for many groups in the SCP universe, the ends always justify the means. The Ouroboros Cycle, Part 2. In the last part, we looked at 9 children who had been abducted from a small Mexican village and turned into brain-dead weapons by the Foundation to be used against an army of reality benders. Whether or not that act was justified is irrelevant, as it was done, and the Foundation is likely very grateful that it was. In this part, instead of looking at the Foundation creating a godlike weapon, we'll be looking at them combating one. I've already covered this Broken God 001 proposal briefly in my video on the Church of the Broken God, and I highly recommend watching that video first to give you some background info on the church itself. The Broken God is a Moksur entity, a rather unique designation meaning broken, which is being used in place of neutralized. Think of it like a dormant volcano instead of an extinct one. It's still dangerous under certain conditions, but right now it's not a threat. It is essentially a collection of specific anomalous objects that come together to form an entity that is greater than the sum of its parts, like Voltron. Unfortunately, unlike Voltron, when this entity came together in 1942 in Mexico, it resulted in a catastrophic change to Mexico's geography and one of the most widespread uses of amnestics to date. The containment procedures note that if a similar event were to occur in modern times, it would be impossible to contain the spread of knowledge, resulting in a broken masquerade scenario, and eventually, an end of the world scenario. There is a partial list of SCPs that were used to make up this entity, and I went over several of them in my Church of the Broken God video, but most of them aren't really significant to this story. What is important, though, is that members of that church, or at least a branch of that church, went to efforts to gather together these SCPs for the specific purpose of creating this entity, the Broken God. When they did, the Broken God began to find and integrate whatever metal objects it could into its body, as well as begin seeking out other anomalous objects. Eventually, though, the Broken God was, well, broken once again, with many of the components taken back into Foundation custody, and the primary component left at the bottom of the Gulf of California under a strict watch. Let's find out what broke the Broken God, and all of the background info that led to that event in 1942. We're given a statement taken from a priest of the Church of the Broken God from 1945, who discusses the first time he saw the heart of the entity, presented by some other church members. This heart would be the core of the broken god, the primary component that allowed it to be a god, and eventually the component that is left sitting at the bottom of the gulf. Priests within the church are responsible for blessing various artifacts related to the broken god, and this priest had already done so on a number of other artifacts. When he first saw this heart, though, he was taken aback by the wrongness of it. It spoke to him telepathically, showing him how much pain it was in, how broken it was, and how much it desired to be whole again. He then corrects himself, saying that the entity associated with this heart didn't desire to be whole, but rather it was being driven by some sort of impulse towards an unthinking end. This is in stark contrast to what the church normally thinks of their god, an entity of pure logic and thought, not impulses. The priest begged the others to take it to the beach of SCP-2217, where it could conceivably be destroyed, but they ignored him. The heart began to move of its own accord and consumed a nearby wrench, integrating it into its body. The others cheered that their god was unbroken, and the priest never saw them again after that. Next, we're given an excerpt from an interview with a member of the FBI's Unusual Incidents Unit, who describes an encounter she had with some members of the Horizon Initiative. The Horizon Initiative is a group formed by various sects of the main three Abrahamic religions to combat anomalous objects and groups they deem a threat, including the Church of the Broken God. The UIU had already handed over a few religious objects, and now the Horizon Initiative wanted them to hand over the objects they had collected connected to the Broken God. While the UIU agents were deliberating, a strange woman with iron chains for hair approached them and asked for a small metal box. The agent asked what the box did, and the woman replied that it would be easier to show than tell. The woman somehow induced a vision in the agent of the world falling away, and an image of two gears that were once meshed together and now broken apart. The vision continued, with the solar system appearing as essentially a machine, hurtling through an oily cosmos with the power of an infinitely unwinding spring. After the vision passed, the agent says that the box felt heavier than before, or perhaps more significant, and she handed it over to the woman despite the protests from her teammates or superior. We'll hear about this chain-haired woman again later. Another interview with a priest of the Broken God taken in 1945, this time an excommunicated one though. The interview concerns the heart of the entity, and the priest discusses how he first heard about it from a high-ranking agent of the church named Ezekiel. Ezekiel worked for Robert Bumaro, who had become the leader of the church, and Bumaro's agents could apparently speak with the Broken God. These agents were the first to begin augmenting their bodies with technology, many of them dying because of it. But Ezekiel was spared this fate, as he was especially close to Bumaro. These agents would gather any potential artifacts they could find to see if they were meant to be a part of the Broken God, and ship them down to Mexico if they were. They had found a bunch of these artifacts, but were still missing the heart, the key component. Ezekiel was the one who came to Bumaro and told him that if they couldn't find a heart, perhaps they could build one of their own. This was basically heresy as far as most of the church was concerned, and so discussion of it was kept a secret. The priest admits that they followed through on this plan. They never found a heart, and instead they constructed one. He's not sure what exactly they went through to build it, but he has his speculations. There was a drought, the polio crisis hit an all-time high, and thousands died of natural causes, with him believing these events to be connected. He finishes by saying that was not the heart of God, but instead something altogether different. The next file gives us our first actual look at the 001 entity, a description of some video footage taken by a local film crew that happened to be on site. A home has already been destroyed, primarily the garage, and there are metal fragments and strips of rubber leading down the street. Pieces of multiple automobiles are strewn across the street, and the trail leads to the entity itself, which is currently consuming and integrating a truck. The entity continues to consume any metal in the vicinity, and additionally, a section of the entity itself breaks away and begins to search for more sources of metal. As this sub-entity searches, it starts to alter its shape, eventually changing into a humanoid figure roughly 3 meters tall, or around 10 feet. It picks up a dead civilian and places them inside of its body, moving on to pick up a second civilian attempting to crawl away. It also places this civilian inside of itself, and continues to grab civilians in the vicinity, placing each of them inside of itself. A growth is forming on the entity's back, and by the time it has grabbed 6 civilians, the growth is larger than the humanoid itself, and it ceases to walk. Its limbs recede into its body, and its ribs extend out, allowing it to scuttle up onto a nearby roof. Here it sits for 20 minutes until its exterior begins to crack and get torn away from inside, revealing a few humanoids. Each one seems to be infected with SCP-217, a virus that converts organic tissue into organic metal, known as God's Ichor by members of the Church of the Broken God. These humanoids exhibit physical characteristics of the 6 captured civilians, although one of them appears to be dead. One of them, a male with clockwork limbs, jumps from the roof and lands on its stomach, which seems to not harm it. It begins chasing after the 001 entity. The other humanoid, a female with chains growing out of its scalp, waves at the camera crew and then stops, jumping out of view of the camera. Well, that all sounds pretty horrible, and not exactly what I'd picture from the return of an omnipotent godlike entity of logic. There are elements here very familiar to the Church of the Broken God, but as others have said, it's just wrong. The entity is growing though, insatiably consuming every piece of metal in sight to make itself larger, and showing no qualms about killing civilians and turning them into something else. This event occurred in November of 1942, so let's move on to a phone call between Robert Bumaro and one of his agents from December of 1942. The church has reined in the entity, keeping it in a warehouse and continually feeding it more metal, per Bumaro's instructions. The Foundation, meanwhile, has been trying to find the entity, the other anomalous objects, and any other members of the church. The church has a safe house containing 100 other objects, but Bumaro is certain that the Foundation doesn't know where it is, and even if they did, the world's focus right now is on the World War in Europe. The agent mentions that they are having trouble finding enough food for the entity, and it's become so ravenous that it's eating the warehouse it's contained in. They cannot reason with it, but Bumaro is convinced that someone who is devout enough can speak with their god and tell it the necessity for secrecy. Rather than angering Bumaro and admitting that they cannot, the agent assures him that they'll make it happen. As you know, they couldn't manage to keep it a secret for too long, and eventually the entity broke loose again, leading to its destruction. A Foundation commander discusses how his team was planning to ship out of Mexico to go to France in order to keep some anomalous objects out of German hands, when the trains stopped running. There had been a number of refugees in the area who said that their entire town had been consumed by a machine, and the railway shut down due to some incident further north. Foundation personnel in the area were hauling some large objects out of Mexico, and so they were forced to wait it out. But they sent a small group north to check out the accident. 5 days passed before one of the men from the group returned, delirious, going on about a world eater and how the rest of the group was dead. The group had come across the entity, and realizing that they would never be able to contain something like this, attempted to destroy it. Unsuccessfully, obviously. The commander himself saw the entity a while later, referring to it as a mountain of moving parts, blackening the sky as it chewed through everything in its path. He says that this went beyond anything they had been trained for, and that they knew this thing was going to kill them. It was just a matter of when. Foundation personnel in the area were kept in the dark, figuratively and literally, as the entity continued consuming and billowing out massive amounts of smoke that darkened the sky for weeks. They're told that they are here to fix the rails, but instead they simply sit and wait. A man comes into town with half of his face burned off, delirious. He talks about a machine the size of a mountain that speaks to you, convincing people to throw themselves into it. The people that do so are shredded instantly. The entity finally comes within sight of the Foundation personnel sitting there, as it moves across the countryside on millions of cogs, like an iron centipede. By this point, its body is large enough to extend upwards into the massive cloud of smoke, making its true size indiscernible. It devours mountains and entire towns whole, pulling them into a hellish furnace in its chest. The people in the area can hear it screaming in their minds. Well, this is a pretty big problem for the Foundation, and one that clearly seems to be beyond their capabilities of destroying, let alone containing. And when the Foundation absolutely needs something dead, they know who to team up with: the Global Occult Coalition, or as it was known in those days, the Allied Occult Initiative. To this day, Foundation agents admit that the GOC were the ones responsible for killing the entity, so this is a good example of the GOC doing right as far as the Foundation is concerned. The AOI found an anomalous device on an island off the coast of Greece, and they had come to believe that it could be used in some way to slow the advance of the entity. The device apparently had some mind-altering effect associated with it, and so the agent discussing these events can't really remember much about it. Agents from the AOI contacted the Foundation and came to Mexico, with the Foundation eager for the assistance. The AOI then sent a single agent with the device towards the entity, which was still in the process of consuming everything in sight, including the ground. The clouds then part above the entity, and a massive mechanical construct appears overhead as it begins glowing blue. A bright beam of light erupts from the construct towards the entity, which reacts violently and begins reaching towards it. An explosion commences, and when the Foundation came in afterwards, they found the entity annihilated, the construct disappeared, and a massive chunk of Mexico destroyed, becoming what is known as the Gulf of California. The construct was later found in low Jupiter orbit and was classified as SCP-2399, although it was in a severe state of disrepair. The Foundation removed the heart from the remains of the entity, causing the rest of the parts on the bottom of the Gulf to collapse. They then utilized some experimental amnestics on widespread groups of populations, causing more than 2 million deaths in the following decade. Whoops. Remember that woman with the chains for hair and that small metal box she took from the FBI? Well, it turns out that she showed up on a small island off the coast of Greece a few months before the destruction of the entity. The AOI approached her, and she was willing to give them the metal box, but then she flipped out and subdued 2 officers before being restrained. She then demanded to be taken to Mexico so that she could take the artifact there. The AOI then looked into what was going on in Mexico and decided to ship a platoon there along with the woman. We'll hear from her again soon. So, the GOC had killed a god, but the Foundation had to clean it up. They found countless small pieces of the entity strewn about, small gears and pulleys and pistons, each of them still moving on their own for some time. Some injuries were had by some agents who were being dumb around the machinery, but only one death, a local who they had sent into the bay to get some straps around the heart. They found him with his head crushed between two moving pieces, and it looked like he had shoved it in there himself. They had also found roughly 100 anomalous objects connected to the Church of the Broken God, and joked that they might have to build a new site just to contain them all. An agent remarks that standing near those artifacts made you feel something, like serenity or relief, except for the heart. When they pulled it out, the locals complained about hearing voices, and none of them would dare approach it, no matter how much money they were offered. The Foundation agents felt iffy about it as well, but they eventually got it loaded onto a ship. The agent then notes that, unlike the rest of the church artifacts, which were unmarked, the heart had a tag on it, reading, "Property of the Factory." If you've watched the rest of my SCP series, you've already heard about the factory, most notably from a 001 proposal I discussed in my SCP-4000 video. The long and the short of it, though, is that the factory is a lot like Dr. Wondertainment, a poorly understood and mysterious group of creators that make anomalous objects. The difference with the factory, however, is that their creations tend to be darker or more dangerous. There isn't a whole lot known about the factory, but you can probably bet that they don't worship the broken god. What ended up happening then is that a group of members of the Church of the Broken God, led by Robert Bumaro, were hell-bent on rebuilding their god at all costs. They had dozens and dozens of small artifacts that they knew were legitimate pieces of the god. But what they didn't have, and what they really needed, was the heart. They don't know where the heart is. The Foundation doesn't know where the heart is. Probably no one knows where the heart actually is. And so Bumaro set out to make one instead. Perhaps that is ultimately what the church is meant to do, make a heart for their god. But the way that Bumaro went about doing so was, in the end, wrong. We don't know exactly what the factory went through to make this false heart. But remember that priest earlier that implied that thousands died due to supposed natural causes right around the time they recovered the heart? The factory generally doesn't shy away from dealing with entities we'd refer to as demonic, and it's likely some horrible ritual was used to create this false heart. The false heart allowed the entity to animate, consume metal, and connect to the legitimate artifacts, but it was driven mad by its own creation, and ultimately begged to be killed. In the aftermath, the false heart was being transported on a ship that ended up crashing, leaving it at the bottom of the Gulf. It was designated SCP-882, meaning that, just like SCP-2399, this proposal implies that the actual document for 882 has been falsified. The final addendum is from an interview with the chain-haired lady, who claimed to be a part of a previously unknown sect of the church, and agreed to talk to the Foundation. She says that the GOC did not kill the broken god, as they claim, but instead just a piece of it, the way a camshaft is a piece of a car. She says that instead, God is everything, from the biggest star to the smallest particle, meshing together as one cosmic machine. She admits that, at one point, the machine aspect was likely just a metaphor, but the idea grew more powerful over time, taking shape into something more real. She can't answer most of the Foundation's questions about the broken god, but she does say that regardless of what the broken god once was, it must remain that way, broken. She also says that the broken god knows that it must remain broken, and thus it was the one that allowed itself to be destroyed by SCP-2399. She goes on to say that SCP-2399 was already damaged before destroying the entity, as this has all happened before. She says that eventually, the monster will win, consuming 2399 and using its power to consume everything. She suggests that perhaps this too has happened before, and the universe has been destroyed and remade by the broken god in the past, but this time there may be some outside forces mingling with it, such as the Factory, or the Davites, or the Fifthus, or some reality benders. She ends by suggesting that the Foundation continue to work with the Church of the Broken God to prevent such occurrences from happening in the future, finishing with, "Apart we are broken, but united we are God." In the end, this is one person's interpretation of the Church of the Broken God ethos, and really we can't be sure how trustworthy this chain-haired woman actually is. The Foundation would certainly not like another instance of this entity to pop up, and they are willing to work with the Church on other matters, such as dealing with the Sarkics, so who knows? This part of the Ouroboros cycle doesn't really specifically intertwine with the previous part at all, except for both taking place in Mexico, but that's largely because they were both written independently. In broad terms, though, we go back to that idea of the ends justifying the means, which is what the Foundation believed with creating the children, and is what Robert Bumaro believed in creating his false broken god. Well, the children ended up serving the purpose of the Foundation. It's more unclear on what Bumaro thinks of his creation. Perhaps this is simply a failed experiment and they move on, or perhaps it was more of a trial run. The Ouroboros Cycle, Part 3. The theme of this mini-series so far has been about the ends justifying the means, from doing horrific things to children to defeat some powerful enemies, to forcefully creating a false god as part of your religion. The third part in the Ouroboros Cycle, Atonement, continues this theme, with the Foundation once again lured by the idea of messing with forces beyond their understanding and control, in order to deal with their problems. Atonement is, in some ways, more comic booky than the previous two parts, as you'll see, and it once again deals with an incredibly powerful godlike anomaly, which might turn some people off. But for those interested, let's continue. This 001 entity is a gravitational singularity in the shape of a humanoid, currently contained at a site in Norway, within a specially designed array. The entity is immeasurably dense, as it's essentially a black hole, and this array is the only thing keeping it in check. A freestanding, humanoid-shaped black hole probably wouldn't be a tremendous problem for the Foundation, but unfortunately the entity is capable of manipulating the nature of reality through alterations in gravity, that change the shape and structure of space-time. In familiar terms, this means that it is a reality bender in a sense, but it works in a different way than other reality benders, and can only be contained by this special array, not by reality anchors. It also means that its alterations to reality are irreversible, even by other reality benders. It is shaped like a humanoid, though, and there is a good reason for that. A team of Foundation researchers in Norway were working on building a device capable of containing entities that manipulate spacetime, specifically those with immense or fluctuating densities. They were basically using a particle accelerator to create a miniature black hole, but the black hole would quickly destabilize. On June 19, 1982, they decided to ramp up their testing. With the test an hour away, the particle accelerator began spooling up, and a research assistant, Dr. Calvin Desmet, noticed some minor power fluctuations. He had the time to fix it, so he went into the testing chamber to fix a power coupling. Unfortunately, and the reason for this is still unknown, a power regulator attached to the primary generator failed, and so the facility was evacuated due to the radiation risk that this posed. Without the regulator, more power than was expected began to flow into the array, causing it to spool up faster. Because of the loud noise of the array powering on, Calvin couldn't hear the evacuation order. Personnel attempted to power down the array, but the power regulator failed entirely, and the array was now approaching testing levels of power. By this point, Calvin realized that something was horribly wrong, and attempted to leave the chamber, but he was too late. A black hole formed within the array, pulling the entire testing chamber, much of the research wing, and Calvin into it. The singularities soon destabilized and dissipated. In the aftermath, many of the administrative personnel were reassigned, and the facility was repaired, as it still housed a few other SCPs. The control system of the array was replaced with an artificial intelligence in order to limit the human element involved. Testing of the array would continue 13 years after the incident, in 1995, although the tests were fairly minor. It wouldn't be until 2004 that the array would finally serve its purpose and begin containing minor gravitational anomalies. They continued ramping up the array's capabilities until 2006, when they finally manifested a black hole and were able to keep it stable. 2 hours after stabilizing this singularity, it began to change, rapidly growing in size and threatening to expand past the array. The AI in control was able to make changes to the system to keep it contained, but a thick cloud of gas and dust formed around the singularity, concealing it. Shortly after, personnel began to hear communications coming from within the array, starting with unintelligible noises, becoming full sentences, and eventually, a conversation. Through the use of infrared cameras, it was determined that there was a humanoid shape within the array, and it was attempting to speak with them. The entity in the array doesn't actually speak in the traditional sense, as it's too dense for sound to travel, but instead it uses gravity to vibrate metal within the array, creating sounds. A Dr. Ramsey is the first to converse with the entity, who reveals that it knows Dr. Ramsey's full name, and knows of the SCP Foundation. The twist here isn't too much of a surprise, and is certainly reminiscent of the comic book story of Dr. Manhattan in Watchmen. But Calvin didn't die when exposed to the singularity. Instead, he became something else. The entity does not refer to itself as Calvin Desmet, but instead says that it thinks it was once him, or he is it. He was here once, and then he wasn't. It's really not clear exactly what the entity is, and what parts of Calvin made up its creation, but Calvin is in there, or at least his memories are. It's somewhat similar to SCP-3812, another godlike entity I've covered in a video previously, written by the same author. Calvin has transcended our existence in some way, but is still capable of communicating with the Foundation. It tells them to deactivate the array, as there is something he needs to do, and then asks them to bring all of the O5 Council here. Dr. Ramsey argues that it's against protocol, but the entity says that they will come, because he has something to offer them. A way out. Keep in mind that at this point, the Foundation is unclear on exactly what this entity is. All they know is that it's immeasurably dense, it's capable of communication, and they currently have it contained. The vague offer of a way out piqued the interest of O5-1, who paid a visit to the entity. The entity allows itself to be referred to as Calvin Desmet, although it admits that it's really not accurate. O5-1 then asks what it meant by a way out. The entity explains that the Foundation's efforts to contain the anomalous in order to protect the world is merely applying a bandage to the real problem, which is entropy. It says that existence is a tapestry of various realities layered on top of one another, and the inevitable problem of entropy causes these realities to bleed into one another. In the moment before Calvin's soul was cast into darkness, he was able to see this tapestry. Basically, every SCP present in this world originated from some other reality, where it's not really seen as anomalous. That is not to say it changes when it bleeds over to our reality, just that the other reality it came from is so different from ours that it's seen as normal. Presumably, objects from our reality that we would see as normal could bleed over to other realities where they'd be seen as anomalous. The entity says that the slow tide of entropy is inevitable, and eventually, the borders between realities will tear away completely, and all existence will be destroyed in the ensuing pandemonium. A typical person might scoff at this notion, writing it off completely as nonsense, but the members of the O5 Council are not typical people, and O5-1 is inclined to believe the entity. He asks how long until this occurs, with the entity replying that it will take decades, but as more tears occur, more and more anomalies will bleed into our reality, with no way to undo it. The way out, it promised, is preventing this collapse from occurring by removing all other realities. With no other realities with anomalous objects in existence, the one remaining universe can exist peacefully. The entity claims that it is capable of doing this by removing the barriers between all the other realities except for the ones around ours. Each other reality will be flooded with anomalies from others, basically the Foundation's worst nightmare, but ours would be safe. The only reason the entity hasn't already done this is because the Foundation is containing it in the array, and it can't see outside of it. After the conversation was finished, all of the staff members currently at the site were amnesticized and transferred, as this was a pretty big secret. O5-1 called a meeting of the Council to discuss this proposition, and vote on whether to release the entity or not. The Council had several teams work independently to confirm the entity's explanation of the multiverse, which they did. They predict that in 30 years' time, there will be an uncontainable amount of anomalies, and within 45 years, something big will get loose, and that'll pretty much be the end. Ironically, the efforts made by the SCP Foundation and any other similar organizations in other realities to prevent the end of their worlds have damaged the barriers between realities. Additionally, the Council posits that it's statistically impossible that an entity capable of saving the world would only come to this reality and not any other. In essence, if the O5 Council votes to not allow the entity to save our existence, there's no guarantee that a different council in a different reality would vote to do it, dooming the Foundation we know and love. O5-1 went to various precognitives, those capable of seeing into the future, to see if there's a time in the future that they cannot see. This was forbidden by the rules of the Council, but O5-1 ignored it, confirming that none of the precogs have had a prediction past 2066. O5-6 wonders if the entity is just a reality bender that will kill them as soon as it's released. But as I said, it's not a reality bender in the traditional sense, and O5-1 explains this, saying that it's become something fundamental to the nature of all things. Ultimately, this is a massive decision for the Council to make, as even if the entity is telling the truth and it will save this universe, it's a decision that will end countless lives. O5-3 says that the goal of the Foundation and the Council is to protect our existence, and they should expect any other O5 Council to come to the same conclusion. All of the work they've done in researching, retrieving, and containing thousands of anomalies is now being revealed to be a waste of time, as the world will come to an end no matter what they do. Except they've been given an option, a way out, and if they do nothing, every universe will die. But if they accept the offer, at least one universe will live. This would be the end of the road for the Foundation, fulfillment of their ultimate goal of protecting our world. It comes down to a vote, with 8 for yes, 4 for no, and 1 abstaining. O5-9, who voted no, says that no matter what, this will be a day remembered as being the day the Council gave up on their mission of securing and containing, risking everything for a glimmer of hope. O5-9 asks O5-1 why he trusts this entity so much, after everything they've achieved. O5-1 says that he knew Calvin Desmet from long ago, and he wasn't recruited by the Foundation, but instead, he volunteered. He had done some work for the Chaos Insurgency, but his young daughter was killed by SCP-106 during a breach, before the Foundation devised reliable containment procedures for it. After that, he sought out the Foundation, and O5-1 believes that if Calvin found a way to remove every trace of the anomalous from our universe, no matter the cost, he would do it. O5-1 trusts the entity to do this because he can hear Calvin's determination in its voice. With the vote finalized, it was time to see if the entity could do what it proposed. Rather than completely releasing it, though, they decided that the array would be slightly powered down, enough for the entity to demonstrate its ability by removing a single SCP from our reality. 3 overseers were in attendance, and the SCP chosen to be removed was SCP-884. You might remember that one as the mirror that the Chaos Insurgency purposefully allowed the Foundation to have, as it spread doubt to those nearby. They power down the array, and the entity says that it can now see everything, including the mirror. It says that it can also see the reality the mirror originally came from, one not unlike our own. In that reality, a dying soul attached itself to the mirror as a curse to whoever should own it. The mirror folds in on itself over and over until it completely disappears, and O5-1 asks how long it will take to remove the rest of their realities. The entity replies that it will only take moments, but it will be agony for everyone affected. The building begins to shake as it starts to work. The room darkens, and the array undergoes an intolerable amount of stress. Suddenly, O5-1 jerks backwards, and his body begins to unnaturally compress. The entity begins repeating O5-1's own words from the council meeting, talking about removing every trace of the anomalous from existence so that their children and grandchildren can live lives that do not end in horror. O5-1 collapses in on himself, eventually disappearing. O5-4 is lifted screaming into the air as her body folds in on itself, bones audibly shattering. She too eventually compresses into a single point before disappearing. O5-12 is about to receive the same fate, but the AI controlling the array has activated an emergency failsafe, powering back on and recontaining the entity before it can do any more damage. So, the entity was clearly capable of doing what it claimed, removing the anomalous from our reality and protecting us. Additionally, it also has a vested interest in doing so. The reason for this is because there is still a part of Calvin Desmet in there. A father who lost his daughter to one of the cruelest SCPs in existence because the Foundation devoted to containing it failed. It can remove the anomalous from our existence, and wants to do so to protect us, but that includes removing the Foundation itself, and the O5 Council that runs it. The Foundation has done good work for the world, but they have also done plenty of horrible things, and Calvin believes that they must atone for these sins. That leads to the name of this part of the cycle, atonement, something which Calvin wants from the O5 Council, but it's something they'll never provide. Ultimately, they could release the entity, saving our reality once and for all, but they would all have to die in the process. This goes back to the overall concept of the ends justifying the means. Calvin believes that removing the Council and the Foundation is justified in this case, but the Council clearly disagrees. The Council developed a protocol to save themselves in the case of the entity breaking free, by escaping into other dimensions. They now believe, however, that this is no longer a viable option, and containing the entity is their only objective. The main failsafe in place then is called the 40 Days Protocol, which involves a series of events if the array fails. First, an evacuation order is given for the facility, in which personnel on site have 7 minutes to get out. After that, sluice gates will open, flooding the lower portions of the facility with water. 2 minutes after that, explosive charges around the test chamber will go off, collapsing the chamber into the massive borehole located beneath it. 10 minutes later, more charges will go off, collapsing the entire facility into the hole, and 15 minutes later, a number of charges will detonate, causing the surrounding mountainside to landslide into the hole, capping it off. A set of locking steel plates will top the hole, and then a nuclear device will be detonated at the base of the hole. Honestly, the Foundation has no clue if this protocol will even work, but it's the best they've got. I know what you might be thinking, as you probably thought the same thing in the last video. What on earth does this have to do with the rest of the Ouroboros cycle? I've hammered on the overall theme of the cycle up to this point multiple times, but narratively it's still pretty loose. Each part so far has been a standalone 001 proposal in their own rights. Grand, dangerous anomalies that can each threaten reality. But there is a big story here. Things will come together in the final part of the Ouroboros cycle, the way it ends. Stay tuned. The Ouroboros Cycle, Part 4. So far, throughout this series, we've discussed gods and mortals, sacrifice, atonement, morality, responsibility, and irresponsibility. In the fourth part of the cycle, The Way It Ends, all of these concepts come together to complete the story. The Way It Ends is simultaneously connected to the previous parts, as well as its own tale, and while it takes place in the same continuity as the other parts, it will only briefly touch upon them. It's really the various themes of the cycle that bind the whole thing together. The Way It Ends is a very lengthy story, with plenty of dialogue between the various characters. Since this is not a reading video, there will definitely be something lost in summary, but I will not omit anything essential to the overall story. The Way It Ends starts with the classic super secure disclaimer that is standard for most 001 files, but the special containment procedures simply read, "It is the imperative of the Overseer Council to establish containment of SCP-001. The description reads, "To know the nature of SCP-001 is to know the nature of the Foundation." For more information, see the attached document. This really does not tell us much at all other than the fact that the Overseer Council's whole purpose seems to be containing this 001, whatever it is. The attached document starts with a poem, seeming to discuss Adam and Eve after they were cast out of the Garden of Eden. Adam rebukes the snake for leading them astray and tricking them, saying that trusting it was his greatest mistake. The snake replies that his greatest mistake was believing that he had a choice at all. With that, let's dive in. The attached document is not an SCP Foundation file at all, but instead belongs to another organization, the Chaos Insurgency. We know that in the first part, the children, 051, used the children to kill the administrator of the Foundation and led a bunch of defectors to start the Chaos Insurgency. We know that the Chaos Insurgency is opposed to the Foundation, and with The Way It Ends, we're going to find out why. The document opens with a slick logo and the motto of the insurgency: "Should intermittent vengeance arm again his red right hand to plague us." The line is taken from Paradise Lost by John Milton, when Belial argues to his demonic peers that they should not seek war with the forces of heaven, as they would only serve to further anger God. In this case, the leaders of the Chaos Insurgency fear the full might of the Foundation as punishment for their rebellion. The foreword reads, "We, the Delta Command, do hereby set in motion the principles of this document, the summa modus operandi of the Chaos Insurgency." Summa modus operandi basically means their principal mode of operating, or in other words, why they were formed in the first place. Delta Command of the Insurgency believes that the overseers of the Foundation have altered the fabric of reality for the benefit of their own wicked desires, and these alterations are the source of all supernatural activity in our universe. This means that, in the eyes of the Insurgency, the Overseers are responsible for creating the very problems the Foundation seeks to solve, and they've done this for their own selfish reasons. The document continues with a list of the 13 Overseers, and a short line for each discussing what each of them has done wrong. I won't go through this list right now, as we'll be looking at each Overseer individually. It continues by saying that the Overseers and their anomalous influence have created a wound on the fabric of the universe, and that wound can't be healed until they are removed. The Chaos Insurgency stands in opposition to this blasphemy against nature, and it also says that they stand insurgent against this chaos, a nice twist on what we normally think of Chaos Insurgency. In order to clean the wound and let the universe heal, the 13 Overseers of the SCP Foundation must be destroyed. This mission statement was first put into place by the engineer of the Chaos Insurgency, its founder, the former 051. What follows then is the actual meat of the document, 13 separate sections for each of the 13 overseers. This is where the story really begins. In the back room of an abandoned Somali warehouse, a man named Calvin Lucian meets with the High Council of the Chaos Insurgency, known as Delta Command. Delta Command had been formed by the engineer to bring together the 7 different branches of the insurgency, and according to legend, the name of the organization came from the engineer stating, "Never in history has a more chaotic insurgency been mishandled into existence." As we well know, the Chaos Insurgency is not a very cohesive group, and Delta Command is fairly representative of that fact. Calvin was a decorated CI agent who understood that the insurgency wasn't there to ever destroy the Foundation, but instead act as a thorn in their side to keep them in check. Calvin was very good at his job though, and had acted as a bit more than a thorn throughout his career, to the point of he was considered for promotion to Delta Command. He had been falsely accused of mishandling insurgency resources around that time, however, and the promotion went to someone else. The current Delta Command doesn't especially care for Calvin, and they wear their disdain fairly openly. Calvin had called this meeting because he claims that he has recovered a journal, a very important journal as it turns out. Before discussing this journal, however, Calvin starts by presenting a report that concerns the Foundation's testing of anomalies. These tests have continually exacerbated the problems initially created by the anomalies themselves, and the problem is getting worse, spiraling toward a point of no return, as Calvin puts it. It's likely at some point in the 2020s that there will be some major public event, and within 5 years of that, things will be too much for even the Foundation to contain. We heard similar things from the Entity in Part 3. Delta Command is unsure where Calvin is going with this, as the insurgency's purpose is to inhibit the Foundation's efforts, and Calvin seems to want to interrupt them entirely. Calvin replies that he intends to uproot the Foundation entirely, leaf and stem, causing Delta Command to break out in laughter. The laughter comes from the fact that taking down the world's most powerful and secretive organization is no small feat. Calvin goes on to discuss the Summa Modus Operandi, a document written up by the first Delta Command, and apparently practically forgotten about by the current Delta Command. Calvin summarizes it by saying that they don't have to take down the entire Foundation, they just have to take down the Overseers. Also not a small feat, as each one of them is pretty much an immortal demigod protected by unknown amounts of anomalies. Just the concept of finding them would typically be impossible, unless you had a certain journal, which Calvin does. This journal was written by one of the top agents of the Global Occult Coalition, who we'll refer to as Agent U, and comprises his report on each of the Overseers. It's important because it supposedly contains the location of a couple Overseers who have never been seen before, ever. This includes 0513, who has apparently made a deal with death, assuring immortality for all of the Overseers. Since you can't kill death, it makes it pretty hard to kill the Overseers, but Calvin says that he doesn't have to kill death, he just has to break death's contract. To show how he might do this, he produces a small vial of liquid from his pocket, which causes Delta Command to break into a flurry of chaos. Delta Command begins to believe that this endeavor might be possible, with Calvin explaining that he is planning to take down each Overseer in order, resulting in the SCP Foundation falling apart. With the Overseers removed, the universe can begin to heal from the wound they created, and someday they'll wake up in a world free from the supernatural. Delta Command approves the mission, and Calvin sets out to deal with 0513. Each file is accompanied by the section of Agent U's journal discussing each Overseer, so let's look at 0513's info. Agent U says that at one point, the O5 Council had access to the Fountain of Youth, SCP-006, which kept the council perpetually young and healthy, but they were still susceptible to dying in many ways. To fix this problem, they conducted an occult ritual involving bringing a person to the brink of death and keeping them in that state. This would summon death itself, who would come to finish the job and collect their soul. This role fell to 0513, a physicist named Felix Carter, who was likely among the first overseers handpicked by the administrator. The ritual was performed, the avatar of death appeared, and 051 proposed a deal. Death would receive 0513's life and a seat on the council, in exchange for granting the overseers immortality. The deal was struck, and 0513 was kept in a near-death state. To protect his body from any tampering, they hid it in a very remote location. Agent U doesn't know exactly where it is, but he writes that there is a location in the South Atlantic where sailors occasionally report feelings of something they can't identify or see, a strange presence. Agent U says that this must be the effects of an anti-meme, something that humans are normally incapable of perceiving. To perceive it, a human would have to be under the effects of a mnestic, the opposite of an amnestic, something designed to make you remember rather than make you forget. Since the Foundation controls the world's limited supply of mnestics, it would be difficult to get a hold of some. He remarks, however, that the Coalition found out that dark rum exposed to sea air has a very mild mnestic property, which, when combined with laudanum, would explain the stories of some sailors who spoke of a towering black spire. Agent U is not sure if there's any truth to these stories, but he writes that if the Foundation did want to hide 0513, an imperceptible prison deep in the world's roughest sea would be the likely place. With that in mind, let's get back to Calvin. Calvin asked Delta Command for 3 individuals to join his team, a group small enough to slip past the all-seeing eye of the Foundation. The first individual is Anthony Wright, one of the top insurgency agents who is currently in his 50s. He's been a voice of reason and direction for decades, but has always passed on a promotion to Delta Command. The second is Olivia Torres, who had built a reputation in the anomalous art community, and had recently been pursued by the Foundation, causing her to flee into the insurgency, making her a somewhat recent recruit. The third is Adam Ivanov, a young and inexperienced agent who is practically a prodigy with computers, but next to useless with a firearm. Calvin had trained and fought alongside Anthony for quite a while, and had known Olivia for some time as well, meaning both were happy to join Calvin's team. Adam had taken a bit more convincing, but when he had found out that Anthony was on the team, he quickly agreed. Adam had spent his youth as a D-class within the Foundation, assigned to SCP-610 due to his parents being Ukrainian political prisoners. Anthony had been a part of the team that had raided the labor camp, carrying Adam out of danger himself. 3 months after meeting with Delta Command, the small team was on a ship in the southern Atlantic, sailing towards a jagged black spire looming in the distance. The Foundation hadn't built this prison. It had likely been built by mysterious people over 100,000 years ago, and the Foundation had just repurposed it. The team was on mnestics, allowing them to see the spire, but they wouldn't last forever, so they had to work quickly or they'd soon be completely unable to even perceive that it exists. The crew purposefully wrecks their boat in order to get on land, as it's quite an inhospitable location, and Calvin goes ahead alone into the prison. Inside, he takes a freight elevator down into the earth, unable to say how long the descent took. At the bottom, he finds a massive chamber lit by torches emitting green flames, the walls carved with ancient runes. A walkway extends to the middle of the room, the rest of the floor missing as a yawning darkness extends below. In the center stands a column of stone, and on it a solitary folding chair containing a human corpse bound by golden chains. A mocking laughter fills the chamber as Calvin approaches, and a voice comes from the corpse. The voice is that of Death, and Calvin asks it what the terms of its contract with the Council are. Death had granted them life everlasting in exchange for a seat at their table, 0513's seat. 0513 is still alive, as his life is insured just like the other overseers, but they gave Death his body, kept perpetually in a state of near death. Calvin proceeds to pull out the vial of liquid and pour it down the corpse's throat, causing 0513's body to return to a healthy condition. Since it's no longer near dead, the contract with Death is broken, and 0513 witnesses the protection of Death leaving him just before Calvin pulls out a pistol and shoots him twice. He then throws the corpse off the edge and finds a silver woman draped in darkness standing next to him. This is the actual avatar of Death, who solemnly confirms that the contract is broken, and she will not stay her hand against the other 12. Before leaving, Calvin asks her why she didn't stop him, as she easily could have. Death admits that there is something festering at the heart of the Council, something that will not die. She accepted the contract because she thought it would get her close enough to whatever it is to kill it, but she couldn't. She says there are things in this world even beyond her reach. Calvin returns outside, seeing the Delta Command sent another boat to fetch the group. They've lost the element of surprise now, and the other overseers are going to be a lot more wary. 1 down, 12 to go. 0512 is known as the Accountant, and Agent U says that he is one of the more interesting members of the Council. 0512 was born Omar Ulau in a small village in Uganda, and soon found himself employed in a small Ugandan accounting firm, gaining a reputation for performing calculations faster than any calculator. The Foundation discovered his existence, and he was placed on the Council soon after. 0512 is said to be the world's premier mathematical prodigy, with an ability to perform complex abstract arithmetic that is almost certainly anomalous in nature. Most spectacularly, 0512 can perform the calculations necessary to accurately predict the outcome of seemingly random probabilities, nearly flawlessly. He has used this ability to predict the rise and fall of various nations, as well as the actions of other potentially hostile groups. Agent U writes that, although he can predict the outcome of events that are affected by other events, he doesn't do so well with predicting isolated events, such as guessing a number a person might be thinking of. He tends to stay around areas with active markets, such as New York, London, Hong Kong, and Tokyo, but he'll likely be a very difficult person to take down, and he must be taken by surprise. Agent U also says that he sets his entire routine around local train schedules, as that's his favorite way of traveling. The story continues with 2 members of the Overseer Council discussing the recent death of 0513, and they are both angry, confused, and somewhat afraid. As Calvin said, they've lost the element of surprise now, as the whole council is going to double down on security. Calvin's team is going to take down the Accountant next, as he's responsible for the Foundation's financial might. Also, conveniently, he's the next in line, after 13. Adam explains that the Accountant is a data sponge, capable of absorbing and analyzing information faster than computers, predicting the boom and bust of a Fortune 500 company based on a train schedule, as he sees invisible patterns no one else can. These patterns aren't anomalous, just his ability to see and understand them. Adam found that there's some sort of weird correlation between international housing markets and train schedules printed in Tokyo on the 5th day of every 3rd month, and he bets that the Accountant goes to Tokyo himself to examine these schedules the day they're printed. Unfortunately, he's also able to use this anomalous ability to make predictions about exactly when and how someone would try and kill him. The next section shows the accountant stepping out of a car in Tokyo, and explains how every breath and step he takes is precisely calculated and predetermined. He makes no mistakes, takes no chances, and accounts for every significant possibility. A man begins approaching him from across the street, and the accountant determines based on the color of the man's shoes that he's here to kill him. He also determines that based on the current market price of peaches, that this assassin is not alone. He sees a Japanese man in his mid-50s with a slight limp who's going bald, meaning that the second assassin is in the third-story window of the wine shop across the street. The accountant adjusts his watch to reflect sunlight into Anthony's eyes, blinding him in his spot in the third-story window. Adam and Olivia are also in pursuit, with them occasionally asking Calvin over the radio for orders. The accountant and two of his guards catch them in an alley, and he stands in the street, asking what he can do for them. He says that he knows they're here to kill him, that they're responsible for terminating Death's contract, and he presumes they want to kill him over an ideological quibble. Adam erupts in anger, and it's clear the accountant is trying to goad him into making a mistake and coming out in the open. Adam eventually does, but he is saved by Olivia just as a sniper attempts to take his head off. The accountant gets away, but none of Calvin's team is harmed. The accountant makes it to his train, running the recent events over in his head, thinking that there was an overwhelming likelihood that one of the assassins should have been taken down by his sniper. He knows that nothing is certain, but the odds of both assassins emerging from that alley unscathed was comparable to a tornado arranging a deck into a house of cards, then back into the same ordered deck. It was nothing short of miraculous. As he boards the train and opens the door to his private room, he finds Calvin sitting in a chair, casually holding a revolver and pointing it at him. The accountant is stunned, unable to comprehend the odds of two miracles happening in one day. Calvin explains that his team had been performing actions decided by a coin flip, something the accountant has no chance of accurately predicting. He asks 0512 for the names and locations of the other overseers, but the accountant knows that he's going to end up shot anyways. Calvin accepts this and kills him. 2 down, 11 to go. 0511 is known as the Liar, due to being the individual in charge of making sure that all the Foundation's efforts are concealed from the world at large. Agent U thought for a while that 0511 was a position held by a number of different people simultaneously, but eventually learned that they were all the same person. This is because 0511 is capable of changing their identity at will, but apparently their original identity was Sam Beale, a former insurgency agent. Sam was presumed killed after a shipping accident off the coast of Bangladesh, and was found by a fisherman after being underwater for days, if not weeks. The Foundation found them and had tried to rebuild their identity in order to find out info about the insurgency, but they were unable to do so. Instead, they created a large number of other identities, and 0511 became able to flip between them. It was later discovered by Agent U that 0511 is capable of exuding an amnestic property at will to those around them, making them unable to remember. Agent U speculates that Sam Beale was forever lost in those waters, their memories devoured by SCP-3000, and the Foundation had merely used them as a vessel for a variety of personalities and abilities. The story continues with a flashback to a time before the Foundation existed. Felix Carter, who would become 0513, is giving a presentation about the nature of reality, how it's composed of threads, and if one were to tug on those threads, you might be able to alter reality. He's also been working with Adam Bright, Jack Bright's father, and they've received funding from Frederick Williams, who would go on to found the SCP Foundation. Williams also meets with two other men, Siegel and Arians, and he gives them his business card, telling them to give him a call. In the present, Olivia is standing on a balcony when she's approached by Anthony. They're looking out over Seattle, and it seems that some time has passed since killing the accountant, as they discuss how the Foundation really unraveled afterwards. Something tugs at the back of Olivia's mind as she talks with Anthony, something she seems to be forgetting. She then abruptly ends the conversation by stabbing a knife into Anthony's chest and pushing him off the balcony. She then wakes up in a bed, with Adam tugging on her arm and telling her to get up. Adam asks how much she remembers, and she replies that she remembers having a dream with Anthony in it, taking place years from now. It felt real, but something was off. The more she thought about it, the more she realized it was a lie. Adam seems to commiserate with her, implying he had a similar experience, and says that they apparently planned for this. There were 2 encrypted video files on his computer that they were supposed to play in this sort of situation. Adam unlocks his video and gestures Olivia to supply her password. She instead snatches a pistol off the nightstand and shoots Adam 3 times in the head. Olivia again wakes up, this time on a cot in an office, with Calvin standing over her. She quickly knees Calvin in his solar plexus and searches for a hidden pistol that she knows is in Calvin's real office, and she finds it, pointing it at his chest. She pauses to think, recounting the previous 2 experiences, and how she knew something was wrong each time. Anthony's lighter was different, and Adam used a different name for his computer. She says that to get out of this, she's going to have to kill Calvin, who of course tries to calm her down. She accuses him of being 0511, the liar, but he says that the liar must be tricking her into killing him. He then says that the liar didn't ask her about her copy of the journal, asking if she still has it. Olivia touches her wrist where the digital copy of the journal is embedded, and the liar smiles. Olivia then wakes up in a hospital, strapped to the bed, with a nurse and a doctor face down on the floor nearby. She sees an older woman in a white suit with a gun sitting, then blinks, and instead sees a man with a mohawk, then blinks again, and sees a man with serrated steak knives for teeth. This is the liar, capable of flipping through identities at will, including Anthony, Adam, and Calvin. Olivia's wrist had been surgically cut open, and the digital flash drive had been removed. She had been captured and brought to the liar for questioning to see how much she knew, but the team had planned for this. The flash drive hadn't contained the whole journal, just the section on 0511. Reading its contents made 0511 remember what had happened to them, how the Foundation had created new identities for them and made them forget about their past in the insurgency. The liar allows Olivia to escape, and gives her a flash drive with info on the next target. The liar says that they are not faultless in what they've done, and if the Foundation doesn't kill them, they'll spend the rest of their life running. As Olivia leaves, she hears a single gunshot from behind her. 3 down, 10 to go. 0510, the archivist, is said by Agent U to possibly be the most dangerous person in the world. 0510 was formerly a school teacher named Diane Walters, who earned a reputation for harming students who didn't meet her ridiculous standards of conduct. She also was known for possessing a near-perfect memory, able to recall anything she had ever learned. A person with that capability would of course be sought after by the Foundation, and she soon found herself on the Overseer Council, in charge of all of the Foundation's records, as well as keeping a mental record of practically every activity taken on the planet. A story going around says that she personally handled an innocuous accidental breach of data by brutally torturing the culprit until he admitted to being a spy in order to stop the torture, and he was executed. The archivist is apparently obsessed with the concept of omniscience, and believes the overseers to be divine entities, far above the rest of humanity. It's said that she's responsible for recreating history after an apocalypse when utilizing SCP-2000, meaning that she has experienced potentially multiple end-of-the-world scenarios and remembers each of them. Agent U speculates that in times of crisis, the Archivist will likely retreat into the Wanderer's Library, where she is a frequent but unwelcome guest. The story flashbacks once more, this time to just after the death of the Foundation administrator at the hands of the children, from Part 1. The primary individuals responsible are Aaron Siegel and Vincent Arians, who we heard about previously when they met with the administrator at a conference. They both went on to join the fledgling SCP Foundation, with Siegel becoming 051. Arians joined Siegel in his defection, along with a number of others, but he's not happy about the situation, as he doesn't understand why the administrator had to die, as he thought they were just destroying the kingdom of Abaddon. Siegel reveals that there never was a kingdom of Abaddon. There was no army of reality benders in the desert. It was just the administrator. According to Siegel, the administrator became something inhuman, capable of bending reality, and believing Siegel to be a kindred spirit, he showed him what he was capable of by leveling an entire Foundation facility himself. Siegel knew that he had to be destroyed, as he wouldn't stop, and that's why Siegel became fully committed to creating the children. Once again, the ends justify the means, or so Siegel believed. The administrator had started the Children Project just to see if it could be done, and Arians wonders if Siegel believed the same thing. The rest of the defectors believe that the administrator aligned himself with the kingdom of Abaddon, and they see Siegel as a hero. In the present, Calvin and Adam are heading into a forest to find the Archivist, while Olivia is dealing with the Liar, and Anthony is getting intel on 059. Calvin says that he plans on shooting the Archivist in the face, and if that fails, he has a secret weapon, but he literally cannot tell Adam what it is. The two come to a place in the forest where two saplings stand side by side, and Calvin explains that this is a way, a tunnel between worlds activated with the right knock, or key. This knock can take the form of a time of day, a specific object you have to carry, a word you have to utter, or a thought you have to be thinking of. This concept should be pretty familiar to those acquainted with the Planescape setting. For this specific way, which leads to the Wanderer's Library, you have to have a piece of knowledge in mind that you're willing to give up, as you'll forget it when you pass through. The knowledge has to be something relatively important to you, so Adam thinks about what THACO stands for, a mechanic used in earlier versions of D&D, and steps through. The two find themselves in a section of the Wanderer's Library, an extra-dimensional space I discussed in my Serpent's Hand video. This section resembles a massive office space, fully equipped with 1980s-era mainframes and computers. The Foundation uses this section to back up all their data, on both our current world and any worlds that came before, all on microfilm. Adam becomes curious about a computer that isn't functioning, and opens it up despite Calvin's protests. Inside is a solitary hard drive spinning, despite no wires connecting to it, and a Davite rune carved into its surface. A librarian appears behind them, one of the native entities of the library capable of navigating its infinite halls. The librarian says that the Archivist is no longer here. She broke her pact with the Serpent by partaking in forbidden knowledge, and writing herself into a story to which she does not belong. Instead, she is now down below the library, and the librarian offers to take them to her. The two follow the librarian for what seems like decades, as time does not pass the same in the library. until they reach the library's foundation, a massive cavern lined with pillars carved by the serpent itself in the eternity before time. The serpent is not actually a serpent. It's an avatar of a universal facet of reality, information. This foundation is the base of all knowledge, and underneath it is the dark endlessness. The librarian gestures them towards a set of doors, beyond which is the source of all knowledge, and it says that there are 3 books there that must not be disturbed. Calvin says that he'd like to make a withdrawal, and the librarian pulls out a short metal tube covered in runes. Calvin apparently brought them this tube many years ago, and the librarian says that there are few things that exist that they have no knowledge of, but the contents of that tube are one of them. The two pass through the doors and find themselves on top of a green hill in a valley, with 2 trees nearby. Under one of them sits a woman in a white dress, eating an apple and reading a book. Calvin approaches, asks if she's the archivist, and then shoots her 3 times. The archivist doesn't flinch as the bullets pass through her. As Calvin continues to shoot her, she asks if he reads. She says that she reads very often, that you can learn everything there is to learn from books, including how to allow bullets to pass through your body. She admits to being afraid when she heard that 0513 died, as mortality makes her job much harder. She came here to learn the secret of immortality, and she's already done it. She gestures to the trees, saying that one of them is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the other is the tree of life, both discussed in the Bible. She says that the serpent made it so that you can only eat from one if you've already eaten from the other, which created a paradox. She learned then that the tree of knowledge doesn't bear fruit because the library is the fruit, and she's learned everything from the library, allowing her to eat from the tree of life. She's read from the 3 books mentioned by the librarian: the Book of Life and Death, the Book of Things That Have Been, and the Book of Things That Will Be. As she now knows of all things within the library, just as the serpent does, she proclaims herself to be the serpent. Her body then splits open, revealing a massive, writhing serpent inside, who proceeds to attack Calvin and Adam. A fight ensues, with the 2 unable to harm the serpent, but it says that despite all of its knowledge, it still does not know what is inside of that tube. Adam eventually opens the tube, causing a long spear covered in runes to drop out. The tube then turns into essentially a harpoon gun, and Adam uses it to launch the spear at the serpent's skull, killing it and causing the landscape to fall away into darkness. The landscape soon returns, with both Calvin and Adam alive, and the archivist speared against the Tree of Knowledge. 2 figures are standing there. One is the actual serpent, and the other is the serpent's brother, Lord of the Realm of Nothingness. The serpent says that the spear they hold is very rare, as it's the spear of the non-believer. It says that it might be older than the library itself, with a legend stating that it was forged when the first thinking being decided to deny omnipotence. The serpent admits that it can't even see the spear, and Calvin confirms that it was given to him by someone, but doesn't say who. They put the spear back into the tube, and the serpent says that the archivist wasn't that different from the 2 of them when she first came to the library. It wonders where their convictions will lead them, and with a blinding flash, the 2 find themselves back in the forest. 4 down, 9 to go. 059 is known as the Outsider, as she was taken directly as a civilian in order to replace the previous 059. She was an Australian geologist that uncovered an anomaly and was discredited by the Foundation to prevent the public from learning about it. Her recruitment straight to the Council by orders of 057 seems to be entirely to serve the purpose of pissing off half of the Council. She is said to be a brilliant researcher, though, maintaining several projects simultaneously. Agent U has very little to say about her otherwise, as she shouldn't be hard to find or hard to deal with. Another flashback, with Aaron Siegel after founding the Chaos Insurgency. He's uncomfortable, as he presumed that the Foundation would quickly die off with their administrator dead and half the Council gone, but the Foundation was continuing on. The insurgency has started to raid Foundation sites, but it already seemed like the Foundation was closing in on their headquarters. Siegel gets a phone call from Aryans, who informs him that the Broken God fanatics are doing something in South America, an event we're well acquainted with. Siegel is even more distressed to hear that the Foundation is fully mobilizing to deal with the problem, despite his hope that they would be in ruins by this point. Siegel wants to go with Aryans to Mexico to see the children one more time. That night, he has many dreams. One in which he and the administrator first open the doors to Site-17, one in which he watches as a truck brings in SCP-173, one in which he establishes a relationship with Sophia Light, who is currently running the Foundation. He dreams of drinking from the Fountain of Youth with the other O5 members, and dreams of the administrator tugging on an ethereal thread, causing the moon to vanish before he brings it back. He dreams of a man laying dead on the ground, his hand clasped around a golden sword, and in the distance, a phone is ringing. In the present, Calvin and Anthony confront 059 in the burned-out ruins of her family home. She tells them about how the Council informed her of things beyond her wildest dreams when she was recruited. She certainly seems to be the most normal of the Council, and she understands why they've come. She says that she'll go out in her own way, and produces a switchblade. She finishes by saying that she used to believe that serving a higher cause made for a meaningful life, but now she realizes that any life can be wasted, and any death can be meaningless. Suddenly, she locks eyes with Calvin, and he experiences a powerful vision of the house around him restored, a happy family, 059 as she would have been if she had lived a normal life. The vision ends with fire and screams, and he sees her as much older than she was. She's now sitting back in a burnt chair, her wrists slit open. Before she dies, she asks Calvin if he's afraid of death. He responds, no, but with her final words, she says that he's lying. 5 down, 8 to go. The 8th Overseer is known as the Lesser, a rather insulting term, as he's not looked upon favorably by the rest of the Council. His real name is Baron Lehman Hoadley, and along with his brother, the two became very wealthy railway industrialists. This wealth allowed the early Foundation to compete against other paranormal groups, such as the GOC, preventing them from being snuffed out. His brother ran the railway company, and Baron essentially ran the Foundation, as he used his influence on the Council to take charge. It's believed that during this time, Baron was using newly created sites to funnel SCPs over to Marshall, Carter, and Dark, receiving kickbacks in return. Tragedy struck, however, when his brother died in a train accident, and Baron found out that he didn't actually control as much of the company as he believed. His brother had written him out of most of the company, and left everything to his son, who had no interest in running a company. The company was sold, leaving Baron much worse off than he used to be. He lost all of his influence on the Council, and became incredibly paranoid that the rest of the Overseers planned to kill him off. He locked himself in a fortress, and began experimenting with anomalies on his own body in order to protect himself. The story continues with Siegel and Arian standing in front of the church in Mexico where the children are buried. They hear and see the effects of the broken god in the distance, and the children seemingly call out to Siegel from underneath him. They beg him to come back and make them whole again. As SCP-2399 prepares to destroy the false god in the distance, Siegel steps into the church and hears the sound of a man laughing. In the present, the crew come to the fortress where 058 is supposedly hiding out. They find it to be a smoking ruin, however, filled with charred remains of bodies. They come to what seems to be the epicenter of the damage, and find a ruined corpse of a man. Anthony identifies him as Baron Hoadley, and figures that 058 had augmented his body in a number of different ways, and all of these things were kept in check by the Overseer's immortality. When that contract was broken and he became mortal again, the augmentations didn't agree with one another, causing quite an explosion. 6 down, 7 to go. At camp that night, the group shares some of their war stories, with Calvin and Olivia talking about how long they've known each other. Olivia admits that she is capable of magic, which she utilized during her anomalous art days. Adam asks Anthony how long he's been around, and Anthony is purposefully vague about exactly how long. Calvin talks about the importance of what they do, of carrying on the engineer's legacy, which Anthony scoffs at. Anthony then reveals that he's much older than they think, as he actually was one of the original defectors that went with Siegel after he killed the administrator. He says that the engineer stabbed the insurgency in the back and went back to the Foundation. Anthony drank from the Fountain of Youth, keeping him young, but he deeply regrets it, and resents the engineer for using the insurgency's idealism for as long as it was useful to him, before abandoning them. Everyone else in the insurgency, of course, respects the engineer as the founder of all of their tenets, but they don't know anything about what Anthony is revealing. He goes on to say that when Siegel went back to the Foundation, he told them everything he knew about the insurgency, including their facilities and encampments. They set up Delta Command in the aftermath to be purposefully realistic in what they could accomplish. He says that the current Delta Command knows none of this, as telling people would either result in them not believing him, or in people losing faith in the insurgency's goals. Anthony is telling this group because he wants them to know the truth of what they're dying for, that they're doing this because they need to return things to the natural order, not because of what some traitor said decades ago. Later, Calvin is sitting by the fire with the second vial of the Fountain of Youth, and Anthony asks him where he got it from. He explains that when the council ran the fountain dry, there was enough left for 12 vials, just in case. Anthony wonders how he got a hold of 2 of those vials, and what he plans to do with it. Calvin responds that he's going to destroy it, eventually, which Anthony agrees with, as it extends your life, but makes it empty, without taste or color. Anthony had spent years trying to undo the effects after drinking it, which has finally resulted in him slowly aging again. The two discuss the final words of 059, whether Calvin is afraid of death or not. Anthony says the decision is his, but if it were him, he would destroy that vial and never think of it again. The two go to sleep, with plenty of more work left to do. 057 is the most fearsome member of the Council by reputation, as she is said to be the de facto leader of the 05s. She commonly goes by the codename Green, due to constantly wearing green pantsuits, which seems rather harmless for someone considered by most to be the devil that sits on the Overseer Council. Agent U recounts a story of a meeting between a Russian intelligence director and a high-ranking member of the GOC. The GOC wished to go into Syria to act against the Foundation, and hoped to secure Russia's support in the endeavor. The intelligence director assured the GOC that they had their support, until he received a phone call and learned that Green was in Syria. The GOC member was furious until he too learned why Russia had backed out. One solitary woman entered the country and sent two massive organizations scurrying. Green seems to personally be involved in a large swath of matters around the world, and Agent U claims that she is always watching and always planning. The GOC thought she was working with the factory, the UIU thought she was working for Curvier, and the Russians thought she was the Scarlet King himself. No one knows exactly what her endgame is, but Agent U gave her a very, very wide berth. In flashbacks, Adam is rescued from an SCP-610 labor camp by Anthony. Siegel announces a breakthrough to an assembly of the SCP Foundation. Olivia gets rescued from Foundation pursuit by Calvin. The Broken God gets obliterated by SCP-2399. And the Administrator discovers a waterfall that flows upwards in a hidden cavern, exciting him. In the present, the team is in Cambodia, meeting with another insurgency agent named Vanderveer. The region is under turmoil, as the local revolutionaries are holding an artifact, and Green has personally come to deal with them. Vanderveer explains that an anomalous mining corporation named Curvier came in years back and ended up polluting the water supply. This is something they've done in the past, and they usually just stick around until the Foundation shows up to clear them out. But this time, the Foundation didn't show up, due to Calvin's team causing problems. The local officials were receiving kickbacks from Curvier, and are now seen as traitors by the locals. Revolutionaries are using the scandal to overthrow the government, and rioters are flooding the streets and looting everything in sight. Green is coming in to stoke the fires of the rebellion so that the Foundation can sweep in afterwards and pick up the anomaly that they're holding. The team ends up getting caught in the street by some rioters. The rioters are put down by an MTF from the Foundation. The team attempts to get away, but they get hit with some gas grenades and end up captured by the MTF. Calvin, Olivia, and Adam wake up in the governor's mansion, now controlled by the Foundation. Green is standing in front of them, and they execute Vanderveer. She commends Calvin for his courage and what he's done so far, and tells him that 0513 was actually worried that someone would come along and do exactly what he did. Siegel had had the Fountain of Youth purposefully drained in order to prevent it, but Calvin found a way to do it anyways, which she applauds. She proceeds to give Calvin a choice. He can either pick one of his team members to die, in which case Green would give herself up, or he can refuse, in which case she'll kill the leader of the revolutionaries, causing a civil war in the region. Calvin chooses himself to die, but Green laughs, saying that there is no such thing as a noble sacrifice. She says that he has no idea what he's doing, even if he thinks that he does. She says that if he thinks that killing people will stop the Foundation, he should ask Aaron Siegel about that. Calvin still refuses, so the revolutionary leader is executed, causing a riot outside. As she points a gun at Adam, she is suddenly sniped by Anthony, who tells them to run. It wasn't a fatal shot, and Green makes it to the roof where there's a waiting helicopter. The revolutionaries are storming the mansion now, and Adam clears the way by using the Spear of the Non-Believer, which immolates them and burns the group to ash. They make it to the roof as Green takes off in the helicopter and taunts them. Calvin and Anthony fire on her to no effect, but a rocket fired by one of the revolutionaries in the streets hits it. Jets begin carpet bombing the city as the crew flees, caught in the middle of this chaos. As they run, they come across the wreckage of the helicopter, and a fiery figure steps out of it, skin melting off, an arm severed, walking on soon-to-be melted legs. It seems Green isn't quite dead yet, and she steps towards the crew, moaning. She raises a gun at Calvin, but Anthony dives in to take the bullets. Green finally collapses, but but Anthony is quickly bleeding out. Calvin reaches for his vial of the fountain water, knowing that it will save him, but Anthony begs him not to. He reveals that his original name was Vincent Arians before dying. Olivia uses her anomalous abilities to turn his corpse into a cloud of crystal butterflies, which fly off. The remaining three meet up with an unnamed member of the insurgency, who gives them a car, supplies, and directions to their next target. 7 down, 6 to go, but now the already small team has lost a very important member. Taking down Green was certainly a big move for the team, but this is an even more uphill battle now. It's clear that the Overseer Council have been involved in some very heinous and shady activities, but there's still plenty of story left to tell, as Calvin and his crew close in on 051. The Ouroboros Cycle, Part 5. In the last part, we looked at the first half of The Way It Ends, a grand tale featuring a small, exceptionally talented team of Chaos Insurgency agents taking down each of the SCP Foundation overseers, one by one. They started with 0513, severing the contract that the overseers had with death, providing them immortality, and swept through the list. 7 of the 13 overseers are now dead, but while dealing with 057, the team lost a crucial member, Anthony, who revealed himself to originally be Vincent Arians, the former cohort of Aaron Siegel. In flashbacks, we've been seeing how Siegel and Arians defected from the Foundation to start the Chaos Insurgency, but now we know that Siegel eventually went back to the Foundation to become 051 once again. In this final part of my miniseries, we'll see how Calvin and his team deal with the rest of the Overseers, culminating in their encounter with 051. 056 is known as the American, a former general that fought in the American Civil War named Rufus King. Somehow, he extended his life prior to ever drinking from the Fountain of Youth, making him by far the oldest current member of the Council. He currently has an office in the Pentagon with the title Special Counsel to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and many military leaders believe his authority is second only to the President, while some believe he supersedes it. It's believed that 056 formed the first mobile task force, Alpha 1, Red Right Hand, in order to hunt down members of the insurgency. Not a very subtle man at all, Agent U writes that they once witnessed him opening a beer with a whip, then using that whip to grab the beer from across the room and finish it in a single swallow. In a flashback, we once again see Siegel and Arians discussing the Foundation and their mobilization to deal with the broken god in Mexico. 30 years have now passed after the death of the administrator. Siegel is still incredulous that the Foundation is up and running after their defection, and he wonders who is left in charge there that could be running things so smoothly. He also ponders who among the Foundation staff would be even able to access Site-01. The two are interrupted by their door opening and Sophia Light entering, a woman that had previously had a relationship with Siegel, but didn't defect with him. Sophia explains that she read the note that Siegel had sent to the current 0513, a note that we read at the end of the Children document. Sophia admits that although they've been telling everyone in the Foundation that things are still under control, they are actually scattered and leaderless. None of the current overseers are actually doing anything, and she doesn't know who's actually running things. That's not to say that nothing is being done, but instead orders are coming from someone located within Site-01, and they have no idea who it is. For a while they thought it was Siegel, and then they thought it might be the administrator, but now they really have no idea. They found an entire new wing built onto a site, and SCP-173 is residing there, but they didn't put it there, and they have no records of it being put there. New facilities are being built, more doctors and researchers are being recruited, and even the mobilization to deal with the broken god was all performed without their command. Somebody within Site-01 is making calls, and their commands are being followed. Sophia wants Siegel and Arians to go with her to Site-01, and Siegel agrees, as long as she understands that they plan to kill whomever is in there. Before they leave, Sophia confronts Siegel on his defection, saying that even though he killed the administrator because he was supposedly the source of anomalies, why are more and more anomalies popping up? She asks that he make sure he's going to do what he wants, and to consider what Arians wants as well. The present timeline picks up right after the death of 057, as the crew is fleeing the chaos in Cambodia. They drove overnight until reaching a small inn, where Calvin meets with another agent of the insurgency, revealed to be one of the Delta Command, Kowalski. Kowalski informs Calvin that the American is nearby, and he's the one responsible for sending jets to carpet bomb the town while they were dealing with Green. The American brought an entire army division with him, along with naval and air support. Kowalski heavily warns Calvin about the situation, suggesting they flee and go after the American some other time. He also mentions that a secure container was brought out of Site-19 and placed on the American's ship, most likely as a secret weapon. Kowalski finishes by saying that they are outnumbered at least 3,000 to 1, by an army trained in hunting people down, led by a man who believes that he single-handedly created the most powerful military in the world. Kowalski says that Calvin doesn't win here by being smart, but instead by forcing the American to do something stupid. The team gets back in their jeep and continues driving in order to put some distance between them and the army while they think, and they eventually find a secluded spot near some mountains where they spend the night. In the morning, they notice a drone in the sky, and they get back in their jeep. As they drive off, a tank comes out of the nearby trees, and they narrowly avoid an explosive death. They hear more tanks behind them, along with helicopters and jets overhead. They eventually are forced out of the jungle into the open, and a helicopter opens fire on them. Olivia pulls out a scoped rifle and asks Calvin to stop. She proceeds to take aim and snipes the pilot, claiming that although she used to be an artist, she's been doing this longer. They continue on. Olivia takes out another helicopter, and their jeep approaches a section of badlands between them and the mountains. In front of them, however, are hundreds of military vehicles, with helicopters above them and tanks behind them. A personnel carrier opens up, and a man steps out, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, a brown jacket, jeans, and boots. The American. Adam suggests that they just drive over to him and improvise, which Calvin approves of. Calvin alone gets out and walks over to 056, who introduces himself as Rufus King. He says that he's not here as an overseer, but instead as an American citizen, and his priorities lie first and foremost in America's security. His association with the Foundation has allowed him to strengthen the security of his nation, and he's hoping to keep that situation going for a long time. He's not happy that Calvin broke their contract with Death, but he's willing to deal with Calvin despite that. In exchange for letting them go, he wants the spear. Calvin doesn't really understand why they would want it, so Rufus explains. They first found the spear in the grasp of some ancient king, and they spent a great number of lives to get it out, due to it being cursed. He doesn't know where it came from originally either, but he does know that it was the spear that a Roman soldier used to kill Jesus Christ. He's not sure how the soldier got a hold of it either, but he says it was the only thing capable of killing him, as it's capable of killing gods. The Foundation is not prepared to deal with an attack by some sort of deific entity, such as Jehovah, Cthulhu, or the flying spaghetti monster, in his words. But the spear could get the job done. If Calvin gives it up, he can go on doing whatever it is he's doing, including killing overseers. Calvin reminds him that that includes him, and the American laughs and says he won't stop him trying to kill him as long as he hands it over. Of course, Calvin says that he cannot, which the American expected, so to give him a sporting chance, he's going to let him run. He shows a large steel crate carried by a helicopter, and says that there's something nasty in there that they've been trying to kill for years, and he's going to open it and point it in Calvin's direction. Whether the thing in the box gets them or his army, he's going to have the spear when this is done. Calvin heads back to the Jeep, and they drive into the Badlands. While driving, Calvin reveals how he got a hold of the spear. When he was younger, he went on a walk with his mother through the countryside, and they came across a lake. His mother turned and said that she recognized someone in the lake, and she proceeded to enter the water and disappear. Calvin saw hundreds of bodies in the lake and followed his mother in, seeing her smile at him as she sank. He fought through the bodies for hours before getting out of the lake, and nobody would believe him about what happened. He went back to the lake recently, not finding any bodies in the water, and he was approached by someone that he barely remembers, like the voice of a person superimposed over a ghost. This entity offered Calvin a choice, taking him back to the moment when his mother was about to enter the lake. Calvin was forced to choose between saving his mother or taking the container that held a weapon that could destroy the Foundation. He chose the spear, and realized that he had always had the container, ever since that day at the lake. The entity approaches him again, and gave him the 2 vials of fountain water as well. Calvin also reveals that he stole Agent Yu's journal from Marshall of Marshall, Carter, and Dark by punching the old man in the face and running off with it. A few hours later, Adam tells the others that the mountain village he grew up in is nearby, and he might have a plan if the American is cocky and stupid enough to march his army up the mountain. They head to the village with the army in pursuit and find it empty, save for one old man. The man's skin seemed redder than normal, and his face and body bulged in certain areas. Adam asks the man where everyone else is, and the man replies that they are all still here, around us, because the sickness came for them. He says his ascension has nearly arrived as he begins crawling towards them. Adam explains that when he was younger, people here started getting sick with no explanation and no functioning cure, and as they got more sick, they began to change. Eventually, the Foundation arrived to clean it out. He's interrupted as 056 and his army arrives in the village, led by a massive, chained lizard creature, SCP-682. He says that he's got 2 problems here, and he intends to leave with only one, implying he plans to use the spear to kill 682. The American is whipping the lizard to keep it moving, and eventually it begins charging towards Calvin's team. It's stopped, however, by the old man, standing in the middle of the road. The lizard opens its mouth in disgust and asks what this filth is, and the old man extends his arms and exclaims that he has ascended. His body proceeds to split open and expand, becoming an SCP-610 entity. It lets out a horrible cry, which is joined by many similar sounds coming from the rocks around them. What follows is a full SCP-610 attack, as all of the village people that had been infected were simply lying dormant in the mountains around the village. The Americans' army division is hopelessly outmatched and unprepared for this, lacking any incendiary weapons. Massive 610 entities begin flinging some of the Army's trucks and personnel carriers, destroying a helicopter in the process. Calvin's team sprint towards an empty Humvee and begin driving it out of the village when they come to the main square. Here, the old man turned flesh entity is battling the lizard, while the American is riding on the lizard's back. His hat has been knocked off, his shirt is ripped and soaked with blood, and he's racked by fury and bloodlust. Olivia takes out a rifle and fires a shot at him, but he deflects the bullet with his whip. Yes, we've gone full anime now. She shoots again, but he deflects the second shot as well. Third time is the charm, however, as he narrowly misses the third bullet, and it sinks into his heart. 056 dies in shock and disbelief, and a throng of 610 entities rip apart both the American and the lizard. 8 down, 5 to go. SCP-682's bones collapse into dust, but a tiny lizard crawls out of the pile, shoots a dirty look at Calvin's crew, and scurries off. As the team drives away from the village, they discuss their next target, who Olivia says is known as Blackbird. The journal says that he just has a way of showing up, and suddenly Calvin slams on the brakes as a small man is standing in front of their vehicle. He wishes them a good evening and says that he hears they are going to soon be looking for him. 055, Blackbird, is described by Agent U as jovial, friendly, outgoing, and remarkably personable, unique traits among the Overseer Council. Despite this, there are some inconsistencies, as although Blackbird doesn't seem to care for all of the secrecy of the Foundation, he's the head of the department in charge of maintaining records on all the different groups of interest known to the Foundation. Additionally, some sources believe that Blackbird suffers from a multiple personality disorder, and there's a story going around that says when the Chaos Insurgency came across a strange red disk, SCP-093, they used it to go to an alternate dimension that had suffered some sort of religious doomsday. They had found a document in that dimension detailing certain high-ranking members of the religious governing body, and Blackbird was pictured, plain as day. It's also said that one of the staff members rescued from the alternate Site-13, featured in SCP-1730, pointed out Blackbird as a member of the GOC in their world. He apparently takes a special interest in any anomalies that interact with other dimensions. The flashback this time focuses on Calvin's team, sitting in a motel room, with Anthony still alive. Anthony discusses the original defection, the Kingdom of Abaddon, and the creation of the children. He says that, while making the children, they did something truly heinous, and he's half convinced that the Overseers later made a deal with death just to avoid the fires of hell they're all now destined for. He goes on to say that the administrator had fooled them, and the whole endeavor was a lie just so the administrator could see if they could create an anomaly instead of discovering them. In the end, those that stayed believed that the children were a net good, that the ends justified the means, and they had created a safer world. Those that defected believed they had done something unspeakable, and the Foundation was rotten to its core. Since the Foundation was much more decentralized then, the defection didn't cause the end of the Foundation, but now the Overseers are the lifeblood of the organization. Additionally, Anthony tells them that underneath almost every Foundation facility is a nuclear device, but at Site-01, there is a system in place that allows a person to detonate all of them simultaneously. This is their plan. In the present, Calvin's team steps out of the vehicle and cautiously approach the man in the road, who raises his empty hands. He takes a bow and introduces himself as Mortimer J. Denning von Kronecker, the 5th Overseer. He says that he came here to meet them, as he's seen many impressive things throughout his life, but has never met anyone who has killed 8 Overseers. Olivia asks why he came here if he knows they're trying to kill him, and he laughs it off, saying that, unfortunately for both of them, killing him isn't going to work. He is willing to demonstrate, asking them to shoot him in the forehead. Calvin and Olivia hesitate, suspecting a trick, so Blackbird pulls out a knife and jams it into his head. He collapses, as expected, blood spurting out, but then the road is illuminated by a purple light. The light pulses twice, there's a distant snapping sound and the smell of ozone, and then Blackbird appears before them, unharmed. He says that he's anomalous, of course, like most of the Overseers, and he offers to show them what he can do and tell them where he's from. They begin following him, and they notice the sky changing, becoming a deep, rich purple. The landscape begins changing as well, into a cobblestone street in a city they don't recognize. The sky changes again into a sullen gray, and it begins drizzling. He says that this is where he's from, London, the last city on Earth. In this world, the Black Death hit very hard, and a fellow came along who told everyone he had a cure, but it wasn't exactly the plague he was curing. In Calvin's world, the SCP Foundation has this individual contained, as SCP-049, of course, but he's much different in this world. In time, every city eventually fell until London was the only one left. He explains that he can step between different realities at will, and when he was younger, living in this cursed world, he dreamed of living in a happier place. He began hearing a voice from another reality, which turned out to be an alternate reality version of himself, and he followed it. The multiple versions of himself began seeking out other versions of himself until they had gathered all of them, and they unified into a single entity. Now, when one version of him dies, another steps in to take its place. He also says that there's another person out there like him, named Allison. I've only mentioned this character once before, in my Serpent's Hand video, as she commonly goes by the title of the Black Queen, said to be the daughter of Dr. Gears. It's said that there are thousands of Black Queens, which corroborates what Blackbird is saying. The two have a deal going, where she keeps him informed of things, and he shows up anytime she needs a little muscle. Blackbird understands what they're doing, but he doesn't want it to happen, because he doesn't want to risk losing touch with all the different versions of himself. To try and dissuade them, he offers them a way out, but assures them it's a legitimate one, not like the deals the other Overseers offered. In front of them are 3 doors, and standing in front of each door are 3 identical men. Realizing that they weren't going to get anywhere by shooting him, they each stepped through a door. Adam wakes up in a comfortable room with a small fireplace burning and something delicious cooking in the next room. Blackbird appears and tells him he's in Portland, Oregon, as his family briefly stayed here when he was younger. They had been seeking asylum here, but they were denied, leading them to the mountain village. But in this world, they were successfully granted asylum. In this world, his parents are still alive, living in Los Angeles, but he stayed here because it felt like home. He's interrupted by a voice coming from the other room, revealed to be Calvin. Blackbird reveals that he knows Adam loves Calvin, and in this world, they ended up married. Blackbird leaves him by saying that this is a life he can live without fear, a life that is his own. Olivia walks through her door and ends up getting salty water in her face as she's on the edge of a yacht. In the center of the deck is an easel, a rack of art supplies, and a half-finished painting. Blackbird appears, saying that this is her boat, and she has nothing to worry about in this world except the easel and the sea. She's not convinced enough by this, and a muscular man comes up on deck from below, whom Olivia seems to recognize as someone named Tevin. Blackbird has been watching Olivia for some time, and knows that Tevin is a former lover and an anomalous artist himself, and in her world, she accidentally killed him during a Foundation raid. In this world, there was no accident, and she can take this boat anywhere she wants with him, living a worry-free life. Calvin steps into a grassy field surrounded by woods, recognizing it as a place near the lake where he lost his mother. He and Blackbird watch as a young Calvin walks with his mother near the lake, and bodies begin to appear, causing Calvin's mother to step towards the water. Blackbird says that the reason Calvin didn't save his mother was because he was a scared boy, but now he has the chance. He's shocked, however, when the young Calvin turns to look at them, and then looks to the tree line, where a figure is standing, holding a tube. Blackbird recoils as adult Calvin approaches and takes the tube from the figure. He opens it, and a pair of glasses tumble out, with the name A. Bright inlaid. Adam Bright. Blackbird cries out, asking why the figure would throw all of their endeavors to waste, saying that at least he tried to fix the problem. Calvin realizes that Blackbird was trying to show them each their ideal worlds, and asks why he wouldn't be satisfied by this one. Blackbird says that the other two wanted things that can be reasonably achieved, but all Calvin wants to do is kill the Foundation, all because of this moment. Despite being given the choice to change his life for the better, Calvin is still choosing violence. He puts on the glasses that the figure gave him, and sees that Blackbird is, in actuality, a horrific bird creature covered in rotting flesh, with a swirling mass of faces howling from inside of it. Calvin says that his mother died long ago because of monstrosities like Blackbird, and Blackbird finally decides to leave this reality. The figure tells Calvin to turn the tube over, and two more objects pop out. One is a fishing rod with the words Dr. Wondertainment's Interdimensional Line and Lure emblazoned on the side. And the other is a wiffle ball bat with the words Bird Be Gone by Dado written on it. Dr. Wondertainment you should be familiar with, but Dado is a somewhat comical and mysterious individual responsible for creating a handful of SCPs. Calvin uses the rod to snag Blackbird, pulling both of them to a different location, a wrecked cargo ship, SCP-455, and Calvin proceeds to begin beating Blackbird with the bat. Blackbird flees through different realities and different locations as Calvin follows him. They visit a Foundation site as a doctor, Dr. Kondraki, rides SCP-682 through a lobby, as depicted in the tale, Duke Till Dawn, and they visit the dead world of SCP-2935, as well as several others. In each place, Calvin begins to notice a young girl, holding up her hand and counting down with her fingers. Finally, the girl reaches her hand out to Calvin, and he grabs it, causing the three of them to land at the base of a large shaft, with a massive machine near them exerting great pressure on them. Blackbird recognizes the young girl as Allison, the Black Queen, and demands to know what she's doing here. She tells him that she's done working with him, as what he's been doing is too unnatural. He replies that it doesn't matter, as she can't stop him. She says that he can, and powers down the machine, revealing the entity from Part 3. Calvin charges at Blackbird with the bat, beating him closer to the entity. The entity asks Blackbird if he's an overseer, to which, of course, he responds yes, demanding to be released. Blackbird seems to have no knowledge of this entity, and it says that he has committed immeasurable crimes. Blackbird cries out that the only thing he's done is offer a way out. The entity says that this is the only way out, and wipes Blackbird from existence. Allison turns the machine back on, and tells Calvin that she had been searching for this entity for years, and this is the only reality where it exists. She wanted to undo the damage that Blackbird had done, as she doesn't think he was evil, but he just never did anything about the injustices he witnessed. In this reality, the entity had killed everybody in the world except for itself, and Allison sticks around just to keep the machine running. Calvin asks if she knows what Blackbird showed Olivia and Adam, but Allison just says that taking them from where they are now would be a cruelty. Next, we see Calvin, Olivia, and Adam together on the tarmac of a small airport. Another member of Delta Command arrives and sees that they all look rough, Olivia and Adam shaken, and Calvin injured from his encounter. It seems Calvin had pulled them out despite Allison's comment. They board a plane and head off. 9 down, 4 to go. Elsewhere, Siegel is at a Foundation facility, descending down an elevator shaft until reaching a shallow pool of red liquid, and 4 figures lying in it. He enters a command, and the figures are raised out of the liquid, and he informs them that there are 3 insurgency agents that have gotten their hands on some powerful artifacts. They have killed 7 overseers, and the ambassador has gone missing, their next likely target. He tells them to find them, bring them back alive if possible, and bring back the spear and the journal. He speaks to a screen with an ominous symbol on it, telling it to show them where they can be found. He finishes by telling the figures to be his red right hand, referring to them as Irantu, Munru, Nanku, and Anru. You might know them better as MTF Tau 5, Samsara. 054, the ambassador, is probably the least involved of the overseers in the Foundation's secretive efforts. Born in Iran before emigrating to France, he became a French actor of some acclaim before joining the Foundation, although those activities have since been expunged. He's said to be anomalously charismatic, but Agent U says there's no evidence to prove that. He acts as the frontman for the Foundation's PR efforts, anytime they need a public face for speaking to various governments or corporations. Sources indicate he was responsible for drawing American attention away from Mexico during the Broken God incident, but overall he tends to maintain as little responsibility within the Foundation as possible. In the flashback, the overseers are sitting around a table discussing the spear of the non-believer, which they have finally recovered thanks to 059. In the tomb where they found it, there had been some books written in the Davite language, probably by Davite captives. The text implies that the spear possibly predates even the Davites, and it was considered a legendary weapon even to them. The overseers discuss the concept of killing a god using a weapon, with 0513, Death, assuring them that it is indeed possible. 059 recounts a myth, saying that when God first smote Lucifer, a shard of his crown fell to the earth, where it was found by Cain. Cain then used that shard to kill his brother, not a rock, and then used his bones to create the spear. They move on to discussing where to keep the spear, as their current location won't do. A phone rings, and Siegel picks it up, speaking in hushed tones before hanging up. He then says that Sophia will take it away, out of time, and he hands the spear to her. She flickers before disappearing, and the overseers suddenly realize that the spear was never there at all. In the present, Calvin's team is on a plane, watching a television as a newsreel states that French billionaire Jean Bertrand, the ambassador, cancels an appearance at a festival due to security concerns. They hear then from another member of Delta Command that the ambassador canceled his appearance because he called them and asked to have a meeting to discuss terms. Apparently, he intends to surrender, as he sees the light at the end of the tunnel. It seems like a trap, but he says he's willing to stand trial, he just doesn't want to die. He's willing to resign and give some information, including the location of the all-seeing eye, which we'll understand more about soon. The member of Delta Command he spoke to, Priscilla, plans to meet him tonight and bring him back to Delta Command for further questioning. After finding out where they're meeting, the Delta member with Calvin's team, Sloan, says that Priscilla is in over her head, as the ambassador is notoriously anomalously charismatic, and he wants to go with Calvin to the meeting. Adam and Olivia are still not in great shape, so they are going to get sent back to Delta. The group arrives in Johannesburg, South Africa, and they see a plane that they identify as Foundation-owned. They meet up with a few other insurgency agents and head into the airport to find Priscilla sitting in a meeting room with the ambassador. Priscilla is extremely angry to see Sloan, but he introduces himself to the ambassador, who Calvin notes is unusually handsome, with a laugh like music and falling water. Sloan also introduces him to Calvin, whom the ambassador seems to be wary around, but shakes his hand. The ambassador says that Calvin's actions have destabilized the Foundation, and he values his own longevity over any ideology. He also says that he possesses an acute ability to read people, even large groups, but there is something massive moving within the Foundation, something very powerful, growing stronger every day. Calvin presumes it to be Siegel, and the ambassador says that that is most likely, and he is not eager to stand between this power and its goal, preferring to see it snuffed out. He knows the location of Overwatch Command, the location of many Foundation black sites, practical knowledge about the Foundation, and is willing to assist the insurgency in cleaning up their mess after it's over. They are suddenly interrupted by shouting in the distance, and the sound of bullets coming from powerful automatic weapons. They begin fleeing the meeting room, dragging the ambassador with them, and the airport is now fully evacuating. An explosion erupts from the airport, and Calvin turns to see 4 figures emerging from the smoke. Humans, but otherworldly, covered in heavy armor and carrying heavy weapons. They begin sprinting towards Calvin, opening fire on him. Calvin ducks for cover as insurgency agents intercept Samsara. As Calvin continues running, he witnesses Samsara decimating the insurgency agents, one of them lifting an agent up and putting her flamethrower to his face, and another tearing a steel support pillar out of a wall and skewering 2 agents with it. Another Samsara member takes aim with a rifle and removes Priscilla's head. Sloan, Calvin, and the ambassador continue fleeing as they make it out onto the tarmac. Sloan is killed by a hail of gunfire, and Calvin attempts to urge on the ambassador, who is now curled into a fetal position on the ground. Suddenly, speakers around the airport crackle into life, and a childlike, unnatural voice comes out of them, saying, "Irantu, not the insurgent. Bring me the insurgent. Kill the traitor." The voice continues to speak the word traitor, as Irantu lands near the ambassador after a jump from 3 stories up. The ambassador attempts to flee again, but Irantu shatters one of his legs with a stomp. Irantu then lifts him by his hair and slaughters him with a hatchet, finished by tearing his skull in half. Sloan's plane, which was carrying Olivia and Adam, takes off, but is quickly shot down by one of the Samsara members. Calvin watches in horror before Irantu slams a closed fist into his face, and he blacks out. 10 down, 3 to go. 053 is known as the Kid, thanks to the single image connected to 053, featuring a very young Korean child. Despite this, very little is known about 053, and no one has ever actually seen them. They always appear through an avatar on screens, speaking with a digitally constructed voice. In the Foundation, 053 is known as the All-Seeing Eye, commonly believed to be sitting at the center of the Foundation's intelligence network. The Foundation seems to have a nearly limitless amount of intel on anomalous entities and groups, information that shouldn't be obtainable by natural means. Agent U writes that he has seen Foundation agents lurking around the sites of anomalous activity before anything has happened, and has seen agents working to supplant world leaders prior to massive unrest that they could not have possibly predicted, thanks to the All-Seeing Eye. Agent U writes that a decade ago, a town in the northwest United States had been having energy issues, shortly after the construction of a hydroelectric dam that should have helped alleviate those issues. Ever since then, heat signatures near that dam have been significantly high, coming deep from within the structure. Agent U also cautions that the all-seeing eye will be protected by a new team of Terminators that are not entirely human. A little late, unfortunately. In a flashback, we see Siegel entering an infirmary where Sophia, 052, is laying on a hospital bed, near dead. Green says that she is dying because she was hung up with silk nails, making her cursed. Siegel recounts the time when Sophia first told him what she could do, dancing through time, as she called it. Then one day she disappeared, and when she returned, her wrists were punched through with dark iron nails, and her side had been skewered. 0513 had warned them that the nails were old and dangerous, and something would end up happening to her blood. The overseers could protect themselves from diseases, but curses were something quite different. Blackbird had prescribed some treatments, but her condition was still worsening, as he could only delay the inevitable. He says that those nails were not designed for someone who survived a crucifixion. Now she has only hours to live, days at most. Blackbird reminds Siegel that a certain contract could protect Sophia, but Siegel is hesitant. He wonders if the others have made Sophia's condition worse just to bring him to this decision point, and he hesitates because Sophia had been against the contract. He finally makes his decision and summons the Avatar of Death, signing the contract, and signs for Sophia as well, before the other 11 overseers sign. Death disappears with a mocking laughter, and Sophia wakes up, expressing her disappointment and sadness to Siegel. In the present, Calvin awakes in a small room with a screen next to the door. The screen displays a rotating Foundation symbol with a red dot in the center, and the speaker crackles to life, speaking in a voice similar to a child's, but more like something approximating what a child sounds like. The voice says that it has brought Calvin to where it lives, along with his friends. It assures Calvin that it didn't kill his friends, unlike him killing the voice's friends. Calvin asks who it is, and music begins playing from the speaker, a distorted mashup of pop music, and at the end he hears a recorded conversation between him and Anthony from months ago. He hears himself say that 051 and 052 are holed up in Site-01, but the kids' whereabouts are unknown. Calvin now knows he's speaking to the kid, who says that he knows that Calvin wants to kill him, along with his mother and father, and he doesn't want him to do that. He also refers to 057 as Mrs. Green, and that she said people that kill like him are evil. The screen goes dark, and the door to the room unlocks. Calvin steps outside into a long, dark hallway and begins walking towards a light. The voice comes back, telling Calvin that he knows who he is, where he was born, where he grew up, how many breaths he's taken in his life, and how many times he's blinked. Before the kid was born, there was another 053 named Anderson, who built impossible machines. His greatest creation was SCP-2003, a machine that could see the future, but Anderson had no passion for it, instead focusing on his thinking machines, so he left the council. Mrs. Green suggested that since the accountant and Blackbird can see the general shape of the future, why not make a machine that can see everything instead? Calvin continues down the hallway, reaching an elevator as lights turn on, illuminating thousands of cylindrical tanks full of green liquid and holding humanoid shapes. The kid continues, saying that the stress of using that machine proved to be too much for people to handle, and they needed a pure, perfect, clean mind with no distractions. The kid was going to be sacrificed as part of the ritual for SCP-2845, the deer, but they instead hooked him up to the all-seeing eye, and ever since then, he's been watching. Calvin descends in the elevator as the kid tells him he knows that Calvin was recruited into the insurgency because the military discharged him for drunk driving and killing a woman. He is telling him this because he knows that Calvin believes he's on a righteous mission, just as Vincent Arians believed it, but only a pure mind should decide the fate of the world. He says that Calvin is waging an ideological war based on one study conducted by a disgraced former Foundation researcher with questionable results collected from dubious sources. He's been told several times that his path is founded not in reason, but in hate and ignorance, yet he continues, and because of that, he is dangerous. Calvin enters the base of a massive shaft, and in the center is a cylindrical machine with a screen bearing the same logo as before on its side. A platform descends, carrying Olivia and Adam, both bound. He steps towards them, but then sees Samsara as well, one of them pointing a rifle at him. The kid sentences the three of them to death for their crimes, and orders Irantu to execute them. As Irantu moves towards Calvin, he stops, as they both see a shimmering line in their air between them. The line opens up, revealing Allison, who is holding the Dr. Wondertainment fishing rod. She tells Calvin good luck and hands him the rod. He proceeds to cast it into the air, catching something unseen and pulling it into this reality. A blast of intense heat, followed by cold, filled the room, and the Samsara member with the rifle took a shot at Calvin, but the bullet was stopped by a gruesome white hand. Emerging from a gap in the air was a horrific entity, vaguely humanoid with many legs, arms, and hands. In place of its head is a wide, flat disc adorned with flaming glyphs. One of the Samsara members swears, as they realize it's a familiar entity, one they fought before inside SCP-1730. Samsara becomes embroiled in a gruesome fight with the entity, and Calvin rushes over to free Olivia and Adam. As members of Samsara start dying, they are quickly brought back as the numerous tanks in the area hold copies of their bodies. The team realizes that Samsara is drawing the entity away from the cylindrical machine in the center, and they decide to break into it. By this point, Foundation drones have emerged from the walls to help combat the entity, as well as keep the team away from the machine. Olivia uses her anomalous abilities and some paint to take out some of the drones and to create a shield as they move towards the machine. Adam begins hacking into a panel on the side of the machine, and Olivia begins working on a way to deal with all the tanks containing Samsara bodies. She pulls out more paint and a paper circle, painting an intricate design on it before tossing it near the tanks. The air in the shaft gets sucked out of it as the disc becomes a portal into outer space. The drones, the pool of liquid containing the tanks, and one of Samsara get pulled into it before the entity approaches it and manages to pull the portal shut. It then begins tearing apart the rest of the tanks before killing the remaining 3 Samsara members. The entity then spasms briefly before disappearing. The kid's voice returns, saying that he has had enough, no more tricks, and no more monsters. Calvin hears something spooling up, turning around to see a gun barrel extending from a wall, and doesn't have time to stop it as it fires a single bullet. Calvin looks towards Olivia as the bullet passes through the back of her skull and out between her eyes. Calvin screams and grabs the spear of the non-believer out of Adam's backpack, jamming it into the panel and through the machine. Another gun barrel appears, and Calvin is again too slow to stop it, as it fires a bullet into Adam's spine. Adam collapses, but Calvin continues prying into the machine with a frenzy, eventually exposing the innards. Inside, in a glass tank, was a small, disfigured baby. Its eye sockets filled with white pus, its mouth and ears sewn shut, a Foundation symbol tattooed on its forehead, attached by wires and hoses to the machine. A horrible screeching sound erupts from the machine's speakers, and Calvin uses the spear to smash the glass tank open. As the laughter begins spilling from the speakers, Calvin, filled with rage, throttles the disfigured baby with his bare hands until all that remains is a puddle of organs. He then turns to Adam, who can no longer feel his legs, and he picks up both Adam and Olivia's body. As he carries them out, he realizes the facility is flooding, and with the last of his energy, he makes it out onto the side of a hill. Adam nears death, and Calvin begins crying, before pulling out a vial of fountain water. Adam protests, his mouth full of blood, but Calvin insists he's not going to lose him too, and pours the water down his throat. Adam instantly recovers, coughs up some blood, and pulls the bullet from his back. Calvin activates an insurgency transponder and tells Adam that it's time for him to finish it. Adam begs and pleads with Calvin not to go, admitting that he loves him, but Calvin simply picks up Olivia's body and begins walking away. Elsewhere, Siegel receives word from an AI that 053 is dead, and also learns that the spear of the non-believer was taken out of Foundation custody an indeterminate time ago, likely by 052, Sophia. Siegel had given her the same administrative access that he himself held, allowing her to remove all records of its removal. The AI informs him that she was last seen entering the garden, and Siegel grabs his coat, telling the AI to prepare his plane, as it's time to go home. 11 down, 2 to go, but now Calvin seems to be alone, outnumbered, and desperate. We've already heard some things about 052, known as the Nazarene, but overall there's very little information on her, without even a journal entry from Agent U. Early Foundation documents put her as the head of the Department of Morality, but it doesn't appear if she ever served in that role. One source indicates her name comes from the fact that she's never seen without gloves, as it's said she's hiding scars from her crucifixion as Jesus of Nazareth, although where that rumor came from is unknown. No flashbacks anymore, as Siegel races towards the entrance to the garden, facing down its guardian, an unmoving, angelic entity holding a flaming sword. Siegel screams for it to step aside, but the guardian only raises its sword and lets loose a streak of flame towards 051. Siegel manages to roll out of the way and pulls out a thin metal rod, slamming it into the ground. This is a reality anchor, apparently a pretty unique one, as it manages to completely pacify the gate guardian, turning it into little more than a charred skeleton. Unfortunately, it also affected Siegel himself, as he had been influenced by anomalies as well, so he begins turning into a very, very old man. He manages to move far enough to escape the reality anchor's effect, returning him to his younger form as he enters the garden. The garden is an anomalous space, of course, endlessly large, but anyone within it is never far from wherever they want to be. Siegel soon finds himself at the Tree of Life Everlasting, a tree similar to the Tree of Life in the Wanderer's Library. At the base of the tree is the corpse of Sophia Light, 052, her wrists slit open. Siegel drops to his knees next to her and cries out to Death to take him instead. His only answer is the continual fall of rain. He sits next to her for hours before realizing there's a piece of paper in her hand. The note is addressed to him, and she explains that She no longer recognizes who she is, and can't continue. She was the one who gave Calvin the fountain water and the spear, as she saw his path and how it led towards Siegel. She hoped that Calvin's crusade would break Siegel's convictions, and he would return to how Sophia used to know him. There is nothing standing between him and his convictions now, however, and although she hopes that he'll take the chance to walk away and live a normal life, she knows it changes nothing. He will face Calvin, but she hopes that she'll see him again, perhaps waiting on that distant shore. Siegel balls up the note in anger and begins walking across the garden into a much darker, more desolate section. He comes to an impact crater a mile across and steps down into it, tears flooding down his face. At the epicenter of the crater, he finds the crumpled form of an angel where it had been resting for 10,000 years, and on its helm the words, "Star of the Morning." This is Lucifer, and Siegel picks up his golden sword, radiating with heat and power, and he suddenly disappears. 12 down, 1 to go. Calvin is reading the journal, which says that Site 01 is located beneath a mountain, guarded by the Red Right Hand, accessible only by the overseers. He believes that the final 2 overseers can be located here, and finishes by writing that he will enjoy the distance he has put between the overseers and himself. To do otherwise would no doubt bring upon yourself a devastating end. Yours most truthfully, Ukulele. You probably know Agent Ukulele better as Dr. Clef. Calvin was sitting on the side of a mountain, looking across to the entrance of Site 01. He had destroyed his phone to avoid distractions from the insurgency, and left Olivia's body in a cave nearby, promising to come back for her. Leaving the journal and grabbing the spear, he approached the steel doors at the entrance to the site, seeing nor hearing a soul. He pushed against one of the doors, which effortlessly swung open. Stepping into the site, Calvin sees that he's in a massive chamber, surrounded by tunnels and staircases, with an elevator in the center requiring a key to activate. On the far end of the chamber is a heavy wooden door, with its frame covered in images. The images depict a race of humanoids riding giant tree creatures, SCP-1000, a massive machine laying dormant beneath the earth, SCP-2000, dark and empty eyes, SCP-3000, and the faces of animals without names, SCP-4000, along with many others. In the doorway, however, was a man, easily 2 meters tall, and wrapped in metallic plates. Wires and tubes ran across the plates, and at first Calvin wasn't sure it was a man at all, but there were human eyes behind his helmet. The man introduces himself as Purpose, the Red Right Hand, the will of the Foundation. Calvin senses something very familiar about the man, and asks if he knows him. The man says, "To know him is to know the Foundation. His words are its words, and his voice are its voice." Calvin remembers a dashing young Foundation agent named Lament, and asks him, "What now?" The man has been tasked with protecting this sanctum until 051 returns, but then says that he is here, and steps aside. As Calvin passes the man, he asks if anyone else will be joining them, and then says to make sure no one does, which the man replies with, "As you wish." Calvin passes through a dark tunnel, into a room filled with screens showing camera footage of a multitude of Foundation facilities. A large screen on the wall lights up and begins showing moments from Calvin's life. Being sent to a youth detention facility, joining the military, being approached by the insurgency, his first meeting with Anthony, with Olivia, with Adam, and scenes of the events we've recently seen. Calvin begins experiencing a sickly feeling, seeing himself not pushing forward through these events, but instead being pulled along by a string. The end of the string is in this room, where Siegel is sitting in front of the screen. Calvin asks him to confirm if he's 051, and then asks about 052, to which Siegel doesn't respond. Calvin opens fire on Siegel, but the bullets dissolve before reaching him, so he pulls out the spear instead. Siegel begins laughing, saying that Calvin traveled across a lifetime just to get here, so he could kill him with a spear, and he doesn't even know why he is here. Calvin repeats his goal of killing the Overseers so that the Foundation dies and the universe can begin to heal. Siegel stands up and says that the two are alike, both spurred forward by conviction, and both led to this spot. In a trillion worlds and a billion universes, they would both always find each other here, as two unstoppable forces hurtling towards each other. He pulls out the golden, flaming sword, and says that either Calvin's convictions will be broken today, or his own. The two commence a duel, each bearing a legendary weapon beyond the understanding of mortals. I'll spare the details of summarizing a fight scene, but each combatant gets some nicks on the other, and the room begins to melt from the fire of Siegel's sword. Siegel says that Calvin is an incredible testament to the will of the insurgency, and a younger version of him would have been envious. When he was younger, he made costly mistakes, believing that those mistakes happened because his resolve wasn't strong enough. But now, Calvin's resolve is every bit as strong, and here he is, making the same mistakes. Calvin replies that he is nothing like Siegel, as Siegel engineered the insurgency and then betrayed it. Siegel informs him that he was never the engineer. Vincent Arians was, and Arians wrote the Summa Modus Operandi. He betrayed the insurgency because a moment came where he had to balance his ideals against something horrible, and his ideals were not strong enough. He's going to kill Calvin because he's worried that Calvin's will is stronger than his was, and Calvin will stand where he did many years ago. The fight continues, but soon Calvin uses the spear to shatter the golden sword, skewering Siegel. The fire in the room goes out, and Calvin approaches the dying Siegel, telling him that the world can begin to heal again now. Siegel says that he thought the same thing, but he was wrong, and he's sorry that Arians died thinking he had been betrayed. The cancer isn't the Overseers, or the Administrator. It's the Foundation itself. Calvin tells him he's going downstairs to finish things, as this is the way it ends. But Siegel says that it's not. Calvin turns to go activate the nuclear devices located at each Foundation facility, and Siegel dies. Calvin approaches the man named Purpose again, and asks him to take him to the room where he can unmake the Foundation. Purpose inserts a key into the elevator, but places a hand on Calvin's shoulder, telling him that once he goes down, there is no going back, and the decision made cannot be unmade. Calvin nods and descends. At the bottom, Calvin enters a well-furnished room with a window outlooking the mountain range. A number of screens are on, showing the deaths of various Overseers at Calvin's hands. On a rich wooden desk in the center is the Foundation terminal, and a black metal rotary phone. Calvin logs into the terminal using both an iris scanner and a fingerprint scanner. The screens then change to show a number of different Foundation sites, and on the main monitor a single option appears: terminate. As Calvin is about to confirm the order, the phone on the desk rings. On the fifth ring, something instinctual inside of him picks up the call and says hello. A man's voice comes over the phone, sounding both far away and close, and the man congratulates Calvin on his initiative, telling him that he is the man that Calvin has been trying to kill, the Administrator. A primal fear begins growing in Calvin, and he says that that's not possible since Siegel killed the administrator. The voice chuckles and says that Siegel killed a man named Frederick Williams, a man who was just tugging upon frayed strings, unraveling the universe. Frederick Williams had planted a seed that grew into the Foundation, and although he died, the seed did not. The administrator is a signature on a document, a suit in a boardroom, a voice on the phone. The administrator exists because of the Foundation, and the Foundation exists because of him. In short, the administrator is a conscious anomaly created by Frederick Williams when he began tugging on the strings of the universe. And to know its nature is to know the nature of the Foundation. Siegel had rejoined the Foundation not because he got a better deal, but because he wanted to finish the job and destroy the Foundation by destroying the administrator. Calvin came along and killed Siegel, the only man standing between the administrator and all of creation. But then he picked up the phone at the desk, because someone always picks up the phone. The administrator says that Calvin could walk away, or even hit that button, causing billions to die from the aftermath, but the administrator would still be here. The administrator is the consciousness of the Foundation, the cancer, as Calvin would put it, and now there is no one to stop his spread. Calvin says that the overseers were evil, but the administrator says that Calvin's belief that he's been in the moral right is his greatest failing. There were a few bad overseers, but most of them were just flawed individuals trying to do an impossible job. But Calvin only considered them to be evil, and justified their murders that way. According to the administrator, there is no good, and there is no evil. It says that perhaps Calvin will find a way to kill it, even though Siegel couldn't, and sometimes, if he tries very hard, Calvin might convince himself he's doing the right thing. The administrator finishes the call by telling him to cheer up, as their work is only just beginning. Calvin sees a memory in his mind of when Siegel was sitting in his position, holding the phone and looking at Vincent Arians, who was pointing a gun at him and Sophia. Arians begs Siegel to leave with him and to leave behind Sophia, who brought them here. Siegel is speechless as he contemplates what the administrator just told him, and he finally tells Arians that he can't. Arians leaves in a rage, unable to kill Siegel, and unaware of what Siegel had learned. The memory fades, and Calvin finds himself sitting alone at the desk as the phone begins to ring. On the 7th ring, Calvin picks it up. In the epilogue, we get another list of files for the 13 overseers, but the first 12 are blank, only reading the word vacant. The file for 051 gives the name The Usurper, formerly Calvin Lucian. Much later, Calvin meets with a new Foundation site director, who is pleased to host the overseers at Site 108. All of the other overseers have already arrived, except for 052. Calvin enters the site and meets with a response team responsible for overseeing the aftermath of a plane crash, resulting in 11 deaths and the theft of a few anomalies. The Chaos Insurgency is claiming responsibility for the crash by posting a video on a website called The Knights of Truth. Calvin clears the room and sits down to watch it. In the video, a man appears sitting at a table. Adam, now a muscular, hardened man, with an ornate jar placed in front of him. Adam speaks to his brothers and sisters of the reborn insurgency, and how they have scored a great victory over those who would seek to undermine their reality. They have sent a clear message to the tyrants in their ivory tower, and their strength and influence is growing. Adam says that they will continue to sink their ships and derail their trains in order to undo their damage and make the world whole again. Adam smashes the jar, releasing green smoke into the air, and says that he knows Calvin is watching. The deaths the insurgency caused are Calvin's fault, and Calvin should not feel safe, as he has become his red right hand. He has seen the puppet that Calvin is parading around as an overseer, but it is not Olivia. He finishes by calling Calvin a coward and a traitor, and he will make him suffer, as he is vengeance and wrath. An hour later, Calvin meets with the other overseers, each newly appointed to their positions. Calvin goes down the list, appointing each overseer to different departments, and eventually reaches 05-2, Olivia, who is replacing the former 05-13 as the head of the Department of Occult Studies. Calvin doesn't look to the figure on his right as he says this. That night, Calvin works on his computer, filing away the most recent insurgency video into an organized collection. He begins writing a text document, compiling all the papers, images, transcripts of conversations taken by the all-seeing eye, and creates a single document that would tell the whole story. It's this document we've been reading this entire time, and he's creating it as a reminder to himself, and to whomever comes after him, of the work that needs to be done, that containment of 001 is the Foundation's highest priority. A figure enters his room, but he can't look at it, as he knows who it is. Calvin wonders how could he explain to the next usurper to make them understand. He had been wrong. It was never the Council, or the anomalies. It's the very essence of the Foundation itself. The Administrator is the goal of the Foundation personified, to capture and contain anomalies at any cost, and anyone trying to stop the Administrator gets caught up in continuing that goal. Perhaps there is a way to stop the Administrator, destroy the Foundation, and allow the world to heal. But as it currently stands, the Foundation is caught in a cycle. To know the nature of SCP-001 is to know the nature of the Foundation. Calvin closes his laptop and asks Olivia if she's ready for bed, but she sits unmoving, letting out a croaking sound as she calls his name. Calvin had made a deal with death to bring her back, but she had not been the same. She sits there unmoving all night, and Calvin does not sleep either. In the morning, she's gone, and Calvin sits at his desk as the phone begins to ring, as it had so many times before. And as he had so many times before, 051 answered. Obviously, the way it ends and the entire Ouroboros cycle is a very lengthy and polarizing story. At the end of the day, however, that's what it is, a story. While you can take the events here as canon within the Foundation universe, you certainly don't have to. Although there are plot holes, plot inconsistencies, contradictions with other canons, and a large helping of references and over-the-top action, it's truly rare to see a story within the Foundation universe of this scope and magnitude. DJ Cactus has contributed a lot to the SCP world, but he considers this to be his magnum opus, and it's hard to disagree. Throughout these videos, we've talked a lot about the ends justifying the means, and what that entails for different people, groups, and the world at large. Ultimately, though, to quote Dr. Manhattan, nothing ever ends.